Welcome to Sacred Realms. It's a great day in Hyrule, y'all. Welcome to Sacred Realms, a Zelda Retrospective Podcast. I'm your host, Lyndon Willoughby. I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Matt Willoughby. We're a little more cozy tonight than we usually are, Matt.
That's because we're nice and snuggled up, real close like bugs in a rug.
Would you like to tell everyone why we're so close tonight?
I mean, I wasn't planning on it, but since you're putting me on the spot, I guess I have to. I had a packed schedule today. So between going into the office and coming here, I have not been back to my apartment, which means that I don't have my own microphone, which means that we're sharing a microphone. Now that you have embarrassed me in front of all of our thousands of listeners, do you feel good about yourself, Lyndon?
I feel like this brings us closer together. I see this as nothing but a win.
Well, that makes one of us. So congratulations.
Oh man, it's fun because I feel like this is going to be an episode where you and I actually have quite a lot of things to talk about. So the passing back and forth of the mic space is going to be a really fun thing as we go through this whole discussion. Man, I tell you what, Twilight Princess just be the game that don't quit. Do it.
I mean, every section. Of the two sections we've played, so limited sample size, admittedly, just really, it goes and 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 it goes. Yes, it continues on.
It's going to be a really fun discussion. I think I'm interested to see what a normal episode of this season ends up being like, because in a lot of ways, what we're doing tonight is part 2 of our discussion last week, right? We're basically we're tying up the front half of what is the introductory section of this game. We're tying up the back half of what is the introductory section of this game, which is just like wild. I mean, especially, last week I know we said that we just couldn't imagine doing it in one go. And after kind of getting into it and finishing off this back 50% this week, yeah, there was just no way. It would never have worked.
So between these two sections of game, I have played almost exactly 4 hours of game. And to think that what would classically be described as the introductory section of the game, which is usually, not always, but usually from beginning to end of first dungeon. The thought that could be a 4-hour chunk of game is insanity. And like not just a 4-hour chunk of game, but a 4-hour jam-packed, lore-filled, world-building filled, plot-heavy, character-heavy, just like you're shoving 20 pounds of story in a 4-hour bag. And like it's a lot of game.
The thing that is actually interesting is I'm trying to compare it to previous Zelda titles, right? Because obviously, from this point on, we actually have pretty chunky game intros on the mainline series, right? Skyward Sword, especially Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, which are kind of a different thing, but still pretty chunky. The immediate predecessor to this game, Wind Waker, it had me thinking about the ways in which the introductory areas compare. And it's tough because I think I keep defaulting to thinking of the Forbidden Fortress First Time as like that game's intro dungeon, right?
Sure.
And in that case, it only takes probably 30, maybe 40 minutes of playtime to get to that point. But the thing is the Forsaken Fortress all that different from Twilight Hyrule Castle in this game? And if they are somewhat similar, then I do feel like it takes quite a while to actually get to Dragon Roost Cavern in Wind Waker. Maybe not 4 hours, but...
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, it definitely doesn't take 4 hours of gameplay. And if you if we were to make the argument, which I'm not necessarily making the argument that every intro section has to be through the end of the first dungeon, because it's not. Like, if you were to say that, then Majora's Mask would have bar none the longest intro section of any game of all time, not including Tears of the Kingdom or Breath of the Wild, which are just very different games. But if you were to make that argument, then, like, yes, a lot of Zelda games might have extremely prolonged intro sections. So I think that where we cut off our intro section being end of Hyrule Castle last week is appropriate. It's still, if you're taking your half-hour time frame for Wind Waker through Forbidden Fortress, it's still 3 times as long as Wind Waker's intro section.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, I think it. The only point that I'm trying to make is that I think that when you list out all these events on paper, I don't know. I think it just feels long. Like, there's a certain feel to it, you know? There's a feeling of things really taking their time and, not being in any rush to, like, immerse you in the action. And I'm wondering if, like, written down as a series of bullet points on a piece of paper, whether it actually looks more similar to a lot of other Zelda games than it feels like it is. You know, that's just kind of what I'm wondering. But regardless, seriously, like, we're getting into some much more traditional Zelda stuff in this week's episode. Last week was a lot of setup, and it was a lot of stuff that we don't necessarily get up to in Zelda games previous to this. But, we're getting back to some more traditional experiences this week. So I think that that's going to be a really fun conversation to have. Real quick, before we actually get into the meat of the episode, Matt, why don't you drop a reminder for everybody real quick before we get into the housekeeping about the other piece of content that we just let loose into the world?
Yeah, so we let loose on our Patreon our first in a series of 3 bonus episodes covering the Legend of Zelda animated series back in 1990. Jackson and I actually co-hosted this one together, so it's a Welcome to Termina episode instead of a Sacred Realms episode, but it was a whole lot of fun, more free-form, kind of flowy, definitely a Sacred Realms After Dark style episode. So if that interests you at all, go head over to our Patreon. It's $3 a month for a Kokiri Sword member, and you'll be able to get access to that content next month. For Master Sword patrons and above, $5 and more. That is available right now as of yesterday. It was a lot of fun. Really enjoyed recording the episode. Don't necessarily know how much I enjoyed watching the show, but it was worth it for the pod.
We enjoyed it at least enough to not declare the whole thing a flaming failure and commit to going ahead and finishing out the series. So there you go.
We're definitely going to do the other 2 episodes. So yes, it will be a complete 3-part series.
We have one more thing we need to do before housekeeping, Matt.
Our revived segment of alcohol.
Yes, the What Are We Sipping This Week bit that we have brought back from the dead as of last week. Yes, it's a beautiful glass of amber liquid. Tonight, we are sipping Wild Turkey Rare Breed Barrel Proof Rye, which I swear to God, we drink more than just rye whiskey, but we kind of landed into 2 in a row here.
That's funny. The story on this one's kind of funny.
Yeah, 2 very good ones. I mean, it's hilarious because this weekend we're actually doing Jackson, third brother of the Willoughby Triforce. We're doing his bachelor party. He's got a wedding coming up. And so being the whiskiesman that he is, he requested that we put on an impromptu whiskey tasting.
Oh no, that's a surprise. He doesn't know about this.
Okay, what do you think of the odds he listens to this episode tomorrow?
0.
Cool, keep talking.
So as a surprise for his bachelor party, we did coordinate all of his bachelor party activities with him, being the opinionated person that he is. We wanted to make sure he enjoyed his bachelor party to its fullest. However, we did keep one part of his bachelor party as a secret just for us, and that is a curated whiskey tasting event that Lyndon, myself, and our dear friend Adam have put together for him. We've got 6 bottles of high-proof barrel select small batch whiskeys that we're going to surprise him with Saturday evening of the bachelor party with a nice whiskey flight tasting where he will get to put his full sommelier credentials on display for everybody. So, funnily enough, Lyndon and I, shocker of shockers, didn't coordinate or talk to each other about what we were getting for this Whiskey Flight tasting. So I showed up to the house tonight to record to show off the bottle that I bought for the whiskey tasting. This wonderful Wild Turkey Rare Breed Barrel Proof Rye. And Lyndon said, "That's hilarious. I bought that literally yesterday for the same reason." So,
one of these bottles has now been donated to the pod.
We now have pod whiskey. Hooray.
And it's actually fun because you and I are big fans of Wild Turkey Rare Breed bourbon, and we don't have as much experience with the rye. So how about let's do some clinkies and take a sip, and then we'll let it guide us into the remainder of the episode.
Indeed. Cheers to pod whiskey.
Cheers to pod whiskey. Goes
delicious.
Yeah, it goes down easy. It got a little spice to it as a rye whiskey should.
Spicy but smooth and doesn't bite you back, which is really all you can ask for from a very high proof whiskey.
Doesn't bite you back. There you go. I love that. All right, let's go ahead and get into the housekeeping and then launch into the remainder of the episode. If you didn't know, Sacred Realms is a weekly re-examination of The Legend of Zelda, one little slice at a time. Sacred Realms drops every Wednesday and is available on all major podcast networks. Every week, we play a new section of a Zelda game, and then we sit down here to talk and to drop our hot takes. If that sounds fun to you, please head over to Apple Podcasts, hit the subscribe button, and be sure to leave us a review. 5-star reviews are greatly appreciated, and they have a chance to get a shout-out here on the show. If you want more Sacred Realms in your life, you can head over to patreon.com/sacredrealmspod to get access to our Discord channel, listener mail, vote on what game we play next, and so much more. Additionally, one of the benefits that Master Sword patrons and above get is that we read their names every week here on the show. Those legendary individuals are Art, Jeremy, Derek, Cosmic Link, Dante 2, Tom, Andy, Stephanie, Billy, Connor, Rachel, Shepherd Street, Matthew, Chris, Daniel, Fallout 907, Kelso, Tiffany the Star, Daxel, Patrice, Stephanie, Il Maestro himself, Dark Duck, he of 100,000 listens on Spotify. Way to go, dude. Brian, George, Mike, Dylan, Lennon, Melanie, Kolku, Aiden, Rowan, Josh, Nick, Dante, Gep, Brittany, Davey, Haru the Mighty, Derek, Albert, Mark, Andy, Cameron, Ben, Daniel, Nick D _TV, Travis, Hyrule Interviews, aka Maximum Nichols, Garrett, and Drew. These are the most legendary of individuals, and I would reclaim the light of a fractured, benevolent spirit with any of them any day of the week.
I think that mostly depends on what form you take when you are in the Twilight zone, because if I'm just a little ghostly spirit, I don't know how I could make that happen. But if I were to turn into a blue-eyed beast, then absolutely. Yes, I would do that.
What about a blue-eyed bunny? I feel like that's a little bit more true to retro Zelda.
How would a bunny kill these nasty bugs?
I don't know. It doesn't really hold up, but I wonder if that was like the concept at any point during this whole thing.
It could be the bunny from Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
Ooh.
With very sharp, pointed teeth. You better cut the audio in there.
Oh, no, absolutely. If there's not a Tim MP3 kind of floating around on the internet somewhere, then I don't even know what the internet's for.
The internet might as well not exist at that point, yeah.
Yep, it would be sad. That'd be a sad realization. All right, y'all, without further ado, let's talk about what we played. We do that every week in the Sacred Realms Rundown, which is a 6-part analysis of what we played this week and the feelings that it made us feel. Today, we are covering Twilight Princess Chapter 2, which gets into our first proper dungeon of the game. Part 1 of the Sacred Realms Rundown is, as always, the plot recap, this week read by Matt. Take it away, Matt.
Well, hey there, y'all. Slight change of plans on our end of things. Matt wrote the behemoth that is this plot recap. He deserves all the credit for it, but schedules got a little tight. We were going to have to record this after the episode itself was recorded just because these plot recaps are getting so freaking long. It was impossible to have it done in time for the main episode. The intention was for Matt to hop on and record it and for me to drop that in here. But like I said, time got away from us and Matt was called away to do professional things, which he is definitely right for prioritizing. So in place of him, you are going to get my dulcet tones, amateur plot recap recorder that I am, filling in for him. But I do just have to say, once again, Matt wrote this thing. It's very long. It's very good. True team effort. So without further ado, let's get into the plot recap as read by me. As we fly through the liminal space of the world, we begin to rematerialize and find our senses picking up familiar things. The air is warm, the scent of the wind is earthy, woody, and comforting, and the water that we feel around our paws is cool and calming. The sun shines brightly around us, and through the canopy of familiar trees, we see that we have landed in the spiritual spring that resides so near our home of Ordon Village. The relief of this is short-lived, as we quickly confirm that we're still in vulpine form, and that means that we will have no way of communicating the situation to any of our longtime friends, if any of them are even still around. Before these thoughts have fully exited our mind, we hear Midna's voice from the ether, and she confirms that even though we have left the lands covered in twilight, we will remain in our wolf form. As we leave the spiritual spring, Midna seems to appear from the ground beneath us and hovers before us in the form of a shadow. Apparently, she will be accompanying us in our own world in the form of a shadow. She tells us that we can't just run off and save Ilya and Colin because we have no way of entering the Twilight Realm by ourselves. We must be pulled in by a being of the Twilight, which Midna can do, but refuses to do until we find her a sword and a shield that she can use. With the admonition that the longer we wait, the further the Twilight expands, we agree to Midna's terms and head off towards the village to try and find a suitable sword and shield. As we approach our house, we see a couple bokoblins hanging out and up to no good. They are no match for our ferocity, but before we can move on, we hear a small furtive voice speak up from behind. A squirrel that is sitting near the entrance to our house speaks up and thanks us for getting rid of the monsters, and tells us of the recent woes of the village. In the time that we've been gone, the bokoblins have invaded the village and kidnapped the children and taken them into the woods. The squirrel comments that he knows us to be a friendly wolf because we smell like the trees of the Ordon woods, and that the other animals in town will be able to help if we find ourselves in need. As night falls, we head into the village to see what we can do, both to find the sword and shield and assist our neighbors if we can. We see Beth's father standing on one of the rock outcroppings, lamenting the village plight to the gods. And on the other side of the river, we see the mayor and Talo's father talking in hushed tones. We head over to the mayor's conversation and eavesdrop enough information to hear about the shield that the family keeps in their home. We also hear an alarming piece of news about Russell sustaining serious injuries while trying to search for the kidnapped children. But at least we confirm that he is alive. Unfortunately, we linger just a little too long, and the mayor and the miller spot us. They turn tail and run quickly into the mayor's house for shelter, which at least leaves us open to exploring the village further. We spot the open window to the miller's house, and while ignoring Midna's aspersions on the intelligence of our lifelong friends, we head to find a path into the house to grab the shield. On the way, we are spotted by Beth's father, who summons the hawk with the nearby singing grass and starts attacking us with our own raptor friend. We have no choice but to temporarily retreat to the safety behind the shop, where we run into the shopkeeper's cat. The cat apologizes on behalf of her master's husband and tells us that we can jump up to the roof of the shop and scare him from behind. We follow the feline's advice and scare the shopkeeper off of his attacking perch. This leaves the route to the watermill house open, and we head inside to grab the shield. The walls of the watermill house are covered in the drawings of our friends Talo and Mallow, and their toys are scattered around the floor as if having just been played with. With our keen senses, we can smell and feel the echoes of our friends, and we must make a concentrated effort to stay focused on the task at hand instead of being overwhelmed with worry and fear for our friends. We jump up to the loft, grab the shield, and head out the open window before we can think too hard about the plight of our neighbors. As we land in the river outside, we hear Russell talking to his wife. Relieved to hear the voice of our friend, we still catch the bit about Russell planning to head back out to the woods to keep searching for the kids, and that the sword he crafted for the royal family is on the couch in their house. With the shield on our back, we head towards Russell's house to grab the Ordon sword. We watch from afar as our dear friend and mentor limps his way across the village, waiting until he is out of sight of his house so that we can sneak around to the side and look for a way in. Luckily, there's a soft patch of dirt that leads right inside the house. and we're able to grab the sword and escape before anybody is the wiser. Midna's sarcasm aside, she appears impressed that we were able to get the sword and shield and promises to get us into the Twilight engulfed area now. We start heading back towards Ordon Woods where we were first transformed, hoping that we can both rescue our friends from the bokoblins and find a way to return to our human body at last. Before we can cross the bridge to the deeper portion of Ordon Woods, we hear a deep voice call to us from the spiritual spring. It sounds like the rustling of oak leaves in the trees, the babbling of the small waterfalls in the spring, the wind through the grass, and the memory of the ancestors of Ordon Village, since time out of mind all commingled. It is an ancient, somber, and thoughtful voice, full of power and wisdom. We are compelled to follow it into the spring and see for ourselves who the owner is. You have been transformed by the power of shadow. Come to me. As we approach the center of the spring, a ring of twisted black stakes falls from the sky and buries themselves in a circle around us. As we brace against whatever this new danger is, the space between the stakes lights up with fluorescent red symbols which form a solid fence. As the stakes themselves glow with this same evil red light, the spirit's voice tells us that a shadow being is approaching. True to that word, a portal opens in the sky and a twilight monster like the one that snatched us into the Twilight realm drops into the ring before us. Knowing the danger this creature poses to us, we immediately jump into action and use our sharp fangs and claws to tear at it in any way that we can. As we lunge ferociously onto our enemy, we strike again and again at its exposed neck area. By keeping up the offensive, the creature can't even move from the spot it dropped to and falls before us. It explodes into a furious floating black cloud of rectangles, and its remains shoot up into the sky to reform the portal that the creature dropped through. The portal is a soothing yet vibrant green, and to our relief doesn't drop any more monsters for the moment. The ring of stakes disappears, and the entire spring goes oddly dark for a moment, until the stones that have encircled the spring since before recorded memory begin to shine with a dark green glow. The light emanating from the stones is pure, and it reminds us of the light of the sun as seen through a canopy of young trees on a summer's day. The stone pulses brightly, and the light becomes pure gold which engulfs the entire spring. From the spring, an orb of this golden light emerges and floats above the water. As we watch in awe, the shape of a large horned animal appears around this orb of light. The creature's horns encircle the orb of light, and it vaguely resembles a gigantic goat like the ones that we heard at Fado's ranch. It addresses us in a slow and heavy manner of speech that we have heard before. O brave youth, I am one of the 4 light spirits that protect Hyrule at the behest of the gods. I am Ordona. The black beast you slew was a shadow being. It had come to seize the power of light that I wield. My brethren in Hyrule have already had their lights stolen by these fell beasts. The entire kingdom has been reduced to a netherworld, ruled by the cursed power of darkness. The blight will not stop with Hyrule. Before long, the entire world will fall into the hands of the king who rules the Twilight. To save this land from the king of the Twilight, the lost light must be recovered. The 3 light spirits who have lost their light must be revived. There is but one who can revive them and redeem this land. You. You still have not discovered your true power. Those transformed by Twilight usually cannot recover their original forms. Unless, if you were to return to the Faron Woods where you were originally transformed, if you were to revive the Light Spirit, there, by the power of the Light Spirit, you may find the means to regain your other state of being. With these words, the light spirit fades back into its spring, and the world returns to its normal mundane state. With the admonition of us being the only one able to restore the world to its rightful form, we head to the Vale of Twilight to try and restore the Faron light spirit and regain our original form. As we approach the Vale, Midna appears again from our shadow, and after some brief taunting, disappears into the Vale before us. Before we can be perturbed by the disappearance of our companion, an enormous glowing orange hand emerges and snatches us up like a sack of corn. We suddenly find ourselves back in the twilight-covered Faron Woods, with Midna in her true form once more. Not long after landing back in the woods, Midna hops back on us like a horse, and we see that she's wearing the shield that we acquired on her face like a mask and holding the Ordon sword like a blade. She obviously has no idea what to do with the weapons from our world, and after lamenting the efficacy of the weapons and swinging the sword dangerously overhead, she decides that she'll just hold on to them for us and not use them for herself. She does, however, consent to help us, since a promise is a promise, and she apparently trusts us enough to help out now. However, as always, her help comes with a cost. She says that we will have to collect some things for her, but won't tell us any details. While promising that it should be easy enough, we have some serious doubts. She then turns our attention to the mournful sound that permeates the area and describes it as a lamentation of the light spirit that had its light stolen. With some more quippy remarks from our companion, we head off to find the stolen light and return it to the light spirit. As soon as we set off, however, we are again encircled by the twisted black stakes, and another portal opens up to drop not one, but 3 shadow beings on top of us. Apparently bored by the impending combat, Midna floats off to wait outside the arena while we deal with the monsters. We quickly deal with 2 of them, but as soon as we set our sights on the third, it lets out a piercing screech that reanimates our 2 felled opponents. At a loss, we attack the third shadow being, only to be scolded by Midna once we fell it. She deigns to rejoin us and offers to help by extending a magical field around us with her Twilight powers. She tells us that once all the beasts are in the field, she can use her magic to help us fell them quickly enough to prevent the reanimating screech from the lone survivor. Sure enough, her magic field works and the stakes and bodies disappear into the sky to form another portal. With the fell beasts slain, we head to the Pharaon spiritual spring in an attempt to connect with the light spirit that resides there. Please be careful. These woods have changed and the dark clouds of dust cover this land. The drape of shadow is called Twilight. In this twilight, those who live in the light have become as mere spirits. It is a place where the dark ones and evil creatures dwell. Blue-eyed beast, look for my light and keep it in this vessel. The spirit gifts us an ornate glass container that vaguely resembles a cluster of grapes. This vessel is designed to contain and carry the light essence that the shadow beast stole from the light spirit, and by collecting all of them in this region, we will be able to restore the spirit and the woods to their natural state. With the last of its weakened power, the light spirit marks the location of the dark insects that hold its light on our map, and sends us off to hunt some bugs. Using our enhanced senses and the locations on the map, we find our first 2 buggos around the corner from the spring, and we make short work of them. The insects make our skin crawl and protect themselves with purple lightning when threatened, but in the end they squash like any other bug. As we explore this darkened version of Pharaon Woods, we find that the twilight has changed it somewhat. The lantern oil salesman is holed up inside his house, and in spirit form he can see the dark insects who have taken over his home, but he apparently can't see us when we kill the bugs for their stolen light. In the dried up pond leading up towards the deep woods, we find a thick layer of purple fog that knocks us out the moment we come into contact with it. A good portion of the insects we need to exterminate are on the other side of this miasma, so Midna helps us jump around the ledges and fallen logs until we can reach our quarry. Some of the nasty buggers attempt to save their hides by flying around, but their stubbly wings can't carry them out of the reach of our claws. As we enter the deep woods region, we're stopped by another trio of shadow beasts. But they're no match for our new power that Midna uses, and we easily slay all 3 to create another portal. The last 2 of our insect enemies are at the entrance to the old temple in the colossal tree trunk. The creepy crawlies seem to have trapped the spirit of a little monkey on a nearby pedestal, and we rush to her rescue as she cowers in helpless fear. Once the insects are dealt with, the monkey wonders aloud what could have happened to her home to make everything go so awry. She says that ever since the boss went funny in the head, there have been monsters everywhere, and she even saw the village kids get led through the woods and into the colossal tree. This useful revelation barely has time to sink in before we feel the curious sensation of teleportation wash over us, and we're taken back to the spirit's spring. The full vessel of light opens up and releases the reclaimed light, and we see a glorious flash of pure white as the entire region is cleansed of the shadow of the twilight. Midna's lament about losing the beautiful twilight aside, we are beyond pleased to see the world return to normal. As Midna rejoins our shadow, we see the light spirit take its animal form above the spring in the shape of a majestic monkey. It introduces itself as Pharaon, the guardian spirit of this forest. Pharaon explains that the fact that we are transformed into the blue-eyed wolf within the Twilight realm, instead of a wandering spirit like everyone else, signifies that the powers of the Chosen One reside within us and are awakening. He tells us to look at our awakened form, and we realize that we are once again standing on our own 2 feet instead of 4 paws. Our rush of gratitude at being returned to our human body is slightly tempered by the confusion about the clothes we find ourselves wearing. The comfortable, if worn, ranch hand clothes we so often wear have been replaced by an outfit seemingly designed for a wandering knight. A long white shirt and tan trousers are the most normal part of the outfit, but after that, everything is abnormal. Chainmail rests against this white shirt, and over the chainmail is a thick and well-made green tunic. Our arms are adorned with bracers, and our sword arm has a thick bracer guard of inscribed leather. A utility belt with many pouches wraps around our waist and connects to a shoulder sling that holds the Ordon sword and shield across our back. Lastly, a green hat of truly unique design rests on our head, completing the garb that Pharaon describes as having belonged to the ancient hero chosen by the gods. The power of this ancient hero has resided in us and is what allowed us to avoid becoming a spirit when trapped in the Twilight. Pharaon declares that we are the chosen heroes sent by the gods to restore this world to its rightful state and save it from the King of Twilight. As the next step of this task, we need to go to the temple in the woods, nestled deep within the colossal tree, and slay the dark power that has taken up residence there. He describes this dark presence as a forbidden power that he and the other spirits locked away ages ago. He cautions us that no creature who lives in the world of the light should ever touch this dark object. But with the world suffused by twilight, we have no choice but to seek this power out so that we may match the power of the King of Shadows. Pharaon fades back into its spring, and we take a brief moment to relish the return of our normal body before proceeding onwards. Midna takes this opportunity to talk to us and throws a few jabs our way before revealing that she was planning to go to the temple all along. With the possibility of the village kids being in there, as well as Pharaon's admonishment about the power needed to stop the King of Shadows, we hike up our new pants and head towards the deep woods. On the way there, we run into the fog-filled pond area, and without Midna's help, we have no way of crossing it. As we're looking over the miasma in despair, our monkey friend comes out of nowhere and snatches our lantern right off our belt. She attaches it to a long stick that she has and beckons us to quite clearly follow her. As we watch, she starts swinging the lantern wildly in circles, and the fog is driven away from the center of her swings. The little rascal assists us all the way across the dried-out pond, only stopping when harried by enemies. On the other side of the pond, she drops the lantern at our feet and flees deeper into the woods without a backwards glance. Even though the lantern is empty, we find the trade-off of safe passage more than worth the price. We fill up our lantern with oil at the parrot's potion stand before continuing on to the temple. Before we can get much past the avian shopkeeper, we see a huge golden wolf with a single red eye blocking our way. It's just in the middle of the path, like a dog waiting for a friend or master. The creature looks like it could swallow us up in a couple bites, but we have to get past it in order to reach the temple. We approach cautiously, but once we get close to the wolf, it rises up on its haunches, takes an aggressive stance, and lunges at the air towards us. We don't remember getting hit by the wolf, but we suddenly find ourselves standing on a barren field with a giant castle wall in the distance. The ground is covered in fog, and other than the very distant castle, there are no landmarks of any kind. In front of us stands a tall skeletal warrior, clad in golden armor and wielding a long sword and a large metal round shield. The warrior's armor is encrusted in vines and spotted with rust, but beneath the entrapments of age, we can see that the armor was once fit for royalty. The skeletal warrior raises its sword and shield as if to do battle, and so we do the same and move in for a strike. As soon as we swing our sword, the warrior moves blazingly fast. It deflects our blow with a deft block and immediately counterstrikes savagely, throwing us to the featureless ground. He stands over us and declares, "A sword wields no strength unless the hand that holds it has courage." As we rise to our feet, unsure of what to expect at this point, the warrior continues. "You may be destined to become the hero of legend, but your current power would disgrace the proud green of the hero's tunic you wear. You must use your courage to seek power, and find it you must. Only then will you become the hero for whom this world despairs. If you do find true courage and you wish to save Hyrule from the horrors it now faces, then you will be worthy to learn the secrets that I hold. It seems that we found ourselves a spectral master to teach us the ways of a true warrior. Since we only learned a bit of swordplay from Russell, we recognize the great value that learning from this specter holds. We agree to learn his secrets, and he takes the time in this liminal space to teach us the ending blow. With this move, we can now finish off weakened enemies once they fall to the ground, instead of allowing them to rise and rejoin the fight. After successfully performing the ending strike, the warrior praises our quick mastery of the skill before departing with some final words. He tells us that there are 6 more hidden skills to learn, and that they are only for one who carries the blood of the hero. The one whose spirit is that of the sublime beast. Grow powerful, test your courage, and when you find that you need another skill to overcome the threats you face, search for the statues that howl with the sound of the wind. Seek the sound that calls to the spirit of the beast to awaken me again. Remember these words: a sword wields no strength unless the hand that holds it has courage. We awaken on the forest floor right where we encountered the spectral wolf, filled with renewed vigor and a sense of confidence. We take the path to the trunk of the tree and enter the forest temple. The temple is ancient, at least as ancient as the roots of this long-dead tree. The inside is dark and smells of dirt, moss, and strong wood. The air is close and oppressive, and the temple feels like a holy place that has turned sour with age and anger. The walls all around are carved with symbols that are illegible, and the torches light the ground in patches that seem dim even with the light of the fire. The doors of the temple are etched with a strange red symbol that swirls like a small whirlpool or a seedling root. There are enemies to face within, but most are simple keys, Deku Babas, or bokoblins. Nothing that overly tests our skill with a blade. As we enter the dungeon, however, our monkey friend seems to have gotten captured yet again, and this time we take the time to free her from her cage. She begins beckoning frantically for us to follow her, and remembering how helpful she was last time, we decide to give it a shot once more. We find ourselves in the next room, face to face with a giant spider that attacks ferociously. After a few blows with our sword, we stun the monster and use our new finishing blow to kill it for good. The platform we find ourselves on has 4 extinguished lanterns and a door on each compass point of the room. We currently can't reach any of the doors besides the ones that we came through, as the bridges are out. The monkey seems to want to go through the far door at the north end of the room, so on a hunch we light all 4 torches on the platform with our lantern. To our delight, some stairs rise up out of the floor and give us access to the northern door. We follow our monkey friend across the stairs, stopping to get a dungeon map from the chest, and then we find ourselves outside the tree in a windswept area full of bridges connecting this tree to another large trunk to the north. There are 3 main bridgeways here, and the middle bridge, which we find ourselves in front of, leads us directly across. The monkey starts across a wooden rope bridge at once, but as soon as she steps foot on the planks, a much larger ape comes out of the door on the far side. It brandishes a large boomerang and throws it, destroying the bridge in the middle and causing it to collapse. The white ape laughs maniacally and taunts us before retreating back into the northern trunk. Luckily, our little furry friend was able to climb up the broken bridge and safely return to us, so we set off together back into the temple to find another way across to the northern section. Our monkey friend seems to know a thing or two about the layout of this place and continues to lead us around to points of interest. We access other doors in this area when she helpfully jumps onto an overhanging rope and swings us across to the other side with her strong paws. We explore the rooms beyond the next door, fight some more nasty spiders, and eventually find another monkey trapped in a wooden cage. This one is hoisted up on top of a wooden totem, and it shatters to pieces when we knock it off the rickety structure. With 2 monkeys free, we head back to the center room and continue our exploration of the temple. The monkeys become invaluable in accessing parts of the temple that are otherwise inaccessible. By forming a team of swinging assistants, they help us to reach faraway platforms that we couldn't jump to normally. As we find more enemies, including a new form of Deku Baba that doesn't die when cut from its stalk, but instead flails around the floor trying to munch us, we find some exploding insects that we use to blow open rock passages or destroy some man-eating plants. Along the way, we run into a most curious little creature calling itself Uku, who somehow became stuck in a pot behind a fallen boulder. In exchange for helping her out of the pot, she asks to travel with us and even help us with her powers to teleport in and out of the temple at will. Seeing no harm in another passenger, we tuck her into the pouch and keep pressing on to find more monkeys. After freeing a handful of the furry little helpers, we find ourselves in a room with a giant man-eating plant that has a Deku Baba head coming out of it. This monstrosity has the audacity to steal a small key that we need to free our next monkey, so we dive in to do some pruning. After smacking the Deku Baba head till it dies, the pitcher plant in the middle opens up wide and we toss a bomb insect right inside and relish the resulting explosion. With 4 monkeys free, we have enough help to swing across the downed rope bridge. We make it to the other side and enter the northern trunk to find a room full of wooden totems, and the large white ape glaring malevolently down from atop a totem in the middle. It charges up the boomerang and uses it to drop some rabid Deku Babas down from the ceiling to attack us. With this, the battle is joined and we dive to take this crazy ape down. We start trying to get at the ape directly. We know from earlier in the temple that rolling into these totems makes them wobble greatly, so we follow the ape around as he hops from totem to totem. As soon as he stands still long enough, we roll right into the totem and are delighted when the ape is thrown off balance, so much that he is unable to catch the boomerang, causing it to smack him right in the face and throw him off the top of the totem. With the ape immobile on the ground, we go to town with our sword to put this monkey in its place. Unfortunately, this ape is tough, so it takes a few more rounds of sword smacking before our enemy is defeated. After the third time of playing Stop Hitting Yourself with our ape adversary, we finally see it defeated as an insect much like the light-stealing bugs from the Twilight realm falls from its head. Once the insect falls to the ground and dies, the ape seems to regain its wits and jumps up, looking around confusedly until it spots us and flees post-haste into the forest. The large boomerang that the ape was using lays on the floor until it lifts up into the air on a swirl of wind. In a shocking turn of events, the boomerang speaks to us and tells us that it is called the Gale Boomerang and that the Fairy of Winds resides inside of it. The fairy thanks us for freeing her from the grips of the dark power that possessed the ape and joins us with her true power available. We use the Gale Boomerang on a wind-powered turner above the exit door and head back out to the windswept pathway. We can now use the Gale Boomerang to move the segmented bridges on either side of this windy passage and explore more of the temple at large. We find another couple of monkey prisoners as we explore and also find the big key, compass, and a couple of heart pieces to increase our life force. We continue exploring only to find the door to the dark power is across a chasm that we have no way of passing. As we open this room, all the monkeys we have freed so far join us and take their place on some raised platforms on the side of the room. There are still a few platforms that are empty, so Midna deduces that we need to find and free the remaining monkeys before we can reach the door on the other side of this room. With our new Gale Boomerang handy, we explore the few remaining rooms and find the last of the monkey friends that we need to free. We head back to the boss's antechamber and are surprised to watch the monkeys form a long ladder of their own bodies in order to hang from a branch high above. By doing this, they have effectively created a long enough rope for us to use to swing from one side to the other and reach the door on the other side. Using this big key, we open the door and head inside to face whatever dark power has infested this place. We come into a room reeking of decay, tepid water, and rotten vegetation. Nowhere else in the temple has this smell existed, nor the presence of evil been so palpable. We see that most of the room is covered in a noxious purple water with some floating driftwood acting as home to some explosive bugs. The shore that exists between the water and the door is not large, but it has enough room for maneuvering if need be. It appears that there will definitely be a need as the water swells and 2 enormous Deku Baba heads rise out and up from the water to screech a challenge at us. The Twilight parasite Diababa has joined the battle, and we are eager to test ourselves against this foe. Using the Gale Boomerang as we have at other points in the dungeon, we lock onto the visible bug bombs and then point the boomerang to the nearest Diababa head. The bombs fly true and blow holes in the parasite's heads, causing massive damage and forcing the heads to retreat below the water. But of course, nothing is ever that easy, and just as the heads disappear below the water, we see the noxious liquids swell and the driftwood sink with our arsenal of bug bombs. Out of this water, the 2 Diababa heads burst forth once more, with the 3rd Master Head making its first appearance in this fight. third head in the middle has a large fanged mouth with a single red eye in the middle attached to its tongue. The creature roars and redoubles its lunging attacks. We have no explosive bugs to use against the beast, so all we can do is dodge and dance our way around the shore. Out of nowhere, the white ape that we freed from the Twilight insect appears in a doorway high above the waterline. He pulls out a bug bomb from behind him and then swings across the arena as if to carpet bomb Diababa himself. Instead, he swings back and forth across the water until we can lock onto the bomb and direct it into Diababa's head ourselves. After tanking out the two flanking heads, we hit the third head right in the mouth, causing it to fall to the shore where we can finally get in some solid sword work on that red eye. Of course, the monster infecting this tree won't be felled with one slash of the sword, and as it recovers from its momentary stun, it blasts the shore with a gout of poisonous purple liquid while its two flanking heads rise out of the water to renew their assault. Luckily, our monkey friend has no shortage of bravery or bug bombs and continues his dangerous swinging maneuver while we focus on taking out the parasites' heads. Finally, the Diababa head is back on the shore, and a few more hits from our swords send it reeling and in its death throes. As the creature flails about with its dying breaths, it begins to decay before our eyes and eventually explodes in the odd black squares that we associate with the death of the shadow beasts. These squares coalesce not into a portal, but into a strange object, slightly resembling a T-shape. This object has a dark corona of power around it, and the aura it is giving off signifies that it must be the forbidden power that Pharaon sent us here to reclaim. This object feels evil, and as it comes closer to us, we almost want to shy away from its presence. Midna comes out of the shadows now and takes the object in her magical hand. She congratulates us on defeating the monster and reveals that this object is in fact what Pharaon told us about. It's called a fused shadow, and there are a total of 3 in this world that Midna wants us to find. She claims that these objects have the power needed to match the King of Shadow, and that the other light spirits should have the remaining 2. However, she does not deign to share exactly what a fused shadow is or what it does, so for now, we'll just have to find the other 2 and see what happens. While we are glad to have rid the forest of the dark presence that corrupted it, we can't help but be disappointed at not finding the children of the village here. With no leads to follow in this place, we grab the heart container that Diababa dropped and head to the portal that Midna has conjured to take us back to Pharaon's Spring. As the disconcerting sensation of teleportation takes over, our thoughts dwell with Ilya, Colin, Tallow, Mallow, and Beth. We can only hope that they are safe, and hope that the path that we have found ourselves on will take us to them soon so that we can be reunited with our friends.
That brings us to part 2, which is our takes, where we talk about this section of the game and how it made us feel. So here's the deal. There is plenty of stuff to talk about in this section of the game. Not quite as much as we had last week. We do have the genesis of 2 of the tentpole activities of Twilight Princess that we get up to here. One being the reclaiming the lost light of one of the spirits, right?
Yes.
And then the other being, of course, a dungeon, you know?
Yeah.
And so those 2 things together are pretty monumental, right? They make up the core structure of basically the entire game. But just wondering, so we've already said there was no way we were going to be able to do this as one episode. Do you think that this week's content has enough just in a vacuum for it to really carry an entire episode? Yeah?
Oh, absolutely. My gosh. The plot recap alone giving you a context for how much meat there is on this bone. And look, I understand that plot recaps, at least the way that I do them, can sometimes be superfluous and have loquacious language and maybe some filler. But when it boils it down, even if I were to just give you the bullet points of what we've all done in this section, it's still a lot. It's a lot to talk through. And especially, like you said, these are 2 tentpole core activities for the entire rest of the game. So they really deserve to be talked about at length here more than anywhere else. in some ways, especially the light collecting activity. This is definitely, I think, the proper place to spend a lot of time digging into our initial thoughts on it. And then as we go throughout the series, we saw this with the Silent Realms a little bit, was we talked less and less about those specifically in those episodes because it was just, yeah, it's another Silent Realm. These things about it were good. These things about it were not good. Overall, still Silent Realms are Silent Realms. So I think we're going to have a similar type of experience with the Vessel of Light activity. And so, yeah, I definitely think that we have more than enough meat on this bone to chew through.
I agree. I just felt like it was worth bringing up for the purposes of conversation, right? Let's go ahead and talk about the sequence of events that happens after we get plunked back into Ordona province from Hyrule Castle. What kicks off here is actually a very traditional Zelda activity that happens in early Zelda games most every time, which is the collection of the sword and shield. Of course, a lot of Zelda games don't really make such of a much about you getting a shield. In a lot of games, they're completely optional. But, you know, in the grand tradition of Ocarina of Time, right, where that was kind of like a gate that you had to get past in order to access later parts of the game, Midna says that we need to find a sword and a shield. And so what this leads to is an exploration of Ordon Village during the hours of nighttime as Wolf Link. Very, very different place than what we saw last week during the daytime with, you know, populated by kids and happy people, right? The tone is very different.
Yeah, no, I think it's really interesting to come back to your home and at like 10 feet away from the spiritual spring, which is like kind of, I imagine the spiritual spring is not exactly a religious site for the people of Ordon Village, but close to, like as close as you can have in a kind of polytheistic nature, more or less nature worshiping folk. Like they just have kind of holy places, sacred sites. And so 10 feet away from the sacred site is a bokoblin who, you know, I assume Link's whole life growing up, like the monsters were always kind of far off and never really a present imminent danger. But here is this bokoblin 10 feet away. And then even more close to home, literally 2 bokoblins in your front yard. And Link having to explore this area, not in his human form, as a wolf, which he's probably still not all that used to, with Midna, this little shadow imp, hanging out and taunting him every once in a while. Like, this was probably like a super jarring and semi-traumatic experience for the poor guy.
Yeah, there's a really interesting gameplay thing that happens here where we start to get clued into the little ways that the game world is set up to accommodate both human Link and wolf Link behaviors, right?
Yep.
So in early parts of the game, you know, we weren't really noticing the little ledges that we now know are spots where you can call upon Midna to help you like jump from place to place, right? We weren't really thinking about the layout of these locations from the perspective of like, you know, what can Wolf Link do here and what can Human Link do here. We start noticing things like areas where you can dig to get into a structure. And it's interesting to me because I do think that the game does a good job of kind of telegraphing the way that the world works and areas where you have access to certain abilities or things in one form of Link versus the other. It's interesting, and it's something that you just kind of learn to really look out for as you go further into the game. And there's, I think it's fun because there's a really subtle bit of world design that has to go into that, right? Like it has to look noticeable as a place where like, oh yeah, you can stand on this, and that's probably like a jump point for Wolf Link, right? But it can't really take you out from an immersion standpoint. You know, it can't look like, hey, here's a stone pad with a wolf etched on it, and that's clearly like a wolf jump point, right?
Yeah, because like you said, that wouldn't make any sense to the world at large. So I think they did a really good job of maintaining a natural flow to the environment while still signposting it enough so that you can see what it is you're supposed to do with that environment. And another thing about this is the use of animals as supplemental NPCs, because obviously humans are not going to talk to you when you're a wolf, as is evident by how the townspeople react to you, either running away from you in fear or attacking you with a hawk. They are terrified of this wolf, which makes me kind of wonder if wolves are a thing in Hyrule or not, because no one seems to know what it is. what Link is. So anyway, it's kind of an aside, but there's really cool use of animals as supplemental NPCs. And so it still helps the world feel lived in and populated, even when you're in Wolf Link form, as populated as it did when you're in Human Link form.
Yeah. What was your favorite animal NPC? Just wondering, because I think it's really funny. I did make it a point to go and talk to every animal that I saw, which was fun because, one, I don't even think I realized that there were as many animals populating the world as there are, you know? I think that they're mostly all there during the daytime. But for instance, like mine was the frogs, right? Like when you're down by the stream and there's some frogs that you can talk to. And I thought they were hilarious, right? Because they basically just go ribbit, ribbit. No one ever talks to me. I don't have anything to say, you know? Like
I liked the Cuckoos. They had kind of an arrogance about them that I found kind of funny for a chicken, but then their arrogance was then shadowed by acknowledging that like Link is a majestic wolf at nighttime, and he's like, oh, to be a majestic wolf at nighttime with the wind rippling through your fur, that must be glorious. And I was like, wow, this Cuckoo is like has some thoughts and feelings. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I was going to say, these cuckoos, look, they have a certain natural beauty about them as well. I think they're maybe ragging on themselves a little unfairly. But yeah, the animal discussions are definitely pretty fun. So we're supposed to, so the premise here is that there are no children remaining in the village, right? They have all been kidnapped.
Yes, correct.
For as much as the first chapter made a big emotional deal out of Ilya and Colin being taken away, I do sort of wish that we had seen a cutscene of things happening in the actual village just to really sell the trauma of all of this.
Yeah, because you don't get to see Beth and Mallow and Tallow being taken away by bokoblins, and that would have been a really big emotional impetus. What you get instead is a line of dialogue from a squirrel to tell you about that. And then you get further context from their parents' trauma, right? Like you see Beth's father doing the woe is me thing, but then also flipping that coin on its head as soon as he sees you and going into full attack mode, which is something you wouldn't think he was capable of based on his characterization in our last episode. You see Russell's dogged determination to do everything he can to try to find the children, even though he's severely wounded and limping. You see the mayor and Mallow and Tallow's father conspiring to see what they can do to help. Like, you see everybody kind of chipping in to try to solve this problem, but you never get to see the problem or feel the emotional weight of that outside of the emotions that these characters impart to you in their dialogue and in their movements.
Yeah. We don't see the mayor. So we see the mayor insofar as it serves the whole process of getting the sword, right?
Shield.
Right, the shield from the water wheelhouse. But I don't feel like we really get the same frantic sense of like despair from that character that we do from some of the other parents, which I thought was interesting, right?
Like Russell and Beth's father are truly like the most affected characters. Russell with his obvious, need to go out even in his wounded state, and Beth's father taking on a whole new side of his personality with the aggressive stance with the hawk. Like those two characters really kind of embody what the loss of a child looks like to me.
I do think that Beth's father using the hawk against us is kind of a fun set piece. I do wonder, it did break my immersion ever so slightly though, because my whole thing is like, why can't we just like shout to the hawk, be like, yo bro, animals, we can talk to each other now.
Yeah.
It's good. I'm okay. I'm a good guy.
And like the squirrel can tell that you smell like the trees of Ordon, and the cat says that you smell like the ranch hand Link. So like the hawk should, with senses that are more finely tuned than either of those creatures, the hawk should probably be able to tell like, oh, this is my buddy Link who calls me with the grass, and I rest on his arm and go attack monkeys on his behalf. So yeah, it was definitely like, it was weird to me, not only that Beth's father could call the hawk, because that seems like an us thing, but that the hawk was willfully attacking you and not taking a second look at like, hey, you seem familiar, like all the other animals were.
Yeah. The hawk definitely killed me while I was trying to figure out how to get up there.
Twice.
Yeah. Well, it takes a heart every time, right?
Yeah.
And it attacks quickly.
And also, I will admit that I let it kill me both times because it got me down to 1 heart, and I was like, I just don't want to listen to the heartbeat the whole time. So, bwomp, bwomp. Yeah, no, not doing that.
Nope, not about it. So it's interesting because I think we can compare this Wolf Link section to what was happening in Hyrule Castle in the Twilight, right? And it's very interesting. I think there's a different feel completely to being Wolf Link in the non-Twilight infested world.
Mm-hmm. And this kind of semi-satisfies the stealth thing that I was talking about last episode, which was Wolf Link feels better as a stealth mission where you're trying to avoid detection and do stuff secretly. So I did enjoy that a lot, but you're right that it feels just the whole vibe of the experience is very different doing it in a place that you're familiar with, in a place that is not engulfed by Twilight, in a place where you're not fighting shadow monsters. Instead, you're fighting bokoblins and avoiding the hawk. Like, those things give it a very different environment and vibe that I think is super effective, and I found far more effective than the Twilight suffused Hyrule Castle segment. Like, I liked this a lot more.
Yeah, I really think I did too. I think that a lot of that is just down to the absence of much combat, right? Or at least when we do have combat, it's against more normal enemies like bokoblins and things, right? There's also a little bit less puzzle-based traversal, right? Like pulling switches and chains and things, and the area feeling a bit more open. Maybe that's contributing to this as well a little bit. And I do think, again, it is just it doesn't hurt either that this is a space that we're already familiar with. And it's one of those things where I do think the emotional investment that the game was creating early on around this entire area really kind of pays off here. The fact that this is all happening at night really helps out with that as well. And it's actually a really interesting thing that happens too later on as we're approaching the Forest Temple, and it's more kind of dusky, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas it was like middle of the day, golden forest sunlight when we were there the first time. And so I think it's a nice environmental thing that the game does where it establishes tone and kind of tries to walk you through how you're supposed to feel just by using time of day lighting situations throughout, like just to create subtle differences in places that we've already been. It's a good trick.
Yeah. It was also interesting to me that when we land in the spiritual spring, it felt like kind of midday. Like the sun was bright, it was not very dusky, but between leaving the spiritual spring and getting to our house, dusk falls, and then by the time you leave the clearing by your house, it's full night. So like that was a kind of interesting immersion break for me, because the whole first segment of the game takes place all in Twilight, and you were able to leave the spiritual spring, go back to the spiritual spring, get Epona, go to the ranch, herd the goats, go back home, all in the span of Twilight. So there was a little bit of like time funkiness that happened there, which was kind of odd to me. I ended up just chalking it up to the veil of Twilight kind of encroaching on the village, making darkness and night and that time of day be more prevalent.
Yeah, it's interesting because I know later in the game, especially once we get into like the open world, if you want to call it that, once we get into Hyrule Field, then we're starting to deal with a bit more of a fixed dynamic day-night cycle, right? But I've always kind of been of the opinion that when these games have that, unless it's tied to actual mechanics and systems, like in Majora's Mask, I kind of can take it or leave it, right? In Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, it sort of has more functional things that are associated with it, right? Like changes in temperature and things like that. Yep. But I think that absent those things, a day-night cycle doesn't really mean a whole lot just in and of itself. I think it's much more effective when it's scripted in this way. And it's kind of like serving to establish a tone for whatever section of the game you happen to be in. So I'm curious to see if this is something that continues happening in other non-Hyrule Field areas of the game as we go through it. So we get our sword and our shield. It doesn't really take a whole lot of time. We do a whole lot of sneaking in and out of buildings. The Ordon sword, I think, might be the coolest looking level 1 sword that we have in any Zelda game.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. Like even the scabbard is really cool. Like it's just iron with a red leather wrapped hilt, and it looks cool. It looks good. It looks well made, well crafted. I like it a lot. I also really like the shield design. I think it's awesome that we're continuing the theme of these things that are made within Ordon Province, following the theme of Ordona, the light spirit, which the goats look like it. The entire economy basically is based around these creatures, and then it's like their house sigil, to use Game of Thrones terms. I really, really like this shield also. It looks used, but sturdy, and it feels placed within this space in a functional, cool way.
Yeah, it's funny too because Midna specifically calls it out as looking cheap, but I think it has a really cool design. It looks like there's some craftsmanship behind it, especially when, again, you compare it to other level 1 shields in other Zelda games, right? Like the Deku shield just sort of looks like some bark we went and grabbed off the side of the Deku tree, right?
Yeah.
The wooden shield that you get in Skyward Sword sort of looks like made from trash, like it's some loosely fitting planks that are sort of stapled together, and this one definitely is a bit more dignified looking than that. I am a little curious why Midna really wants us to have these things. I kind of chalked it up to the character having some foreknowledge of like, hey, the goal here, even if Link doesn't know it yet, is to get him out of beast mode, and we're going to need to be armed in order to go into a temple and get a fused shadow once that happens. She's not explaining any of that to us.
I kind of took a different direction in feeling that Midna was thinking she was going to be the hero and we were going to be kind of her wolf sidekick the whole time, because I don't get the impression that she is aware that we can turn back into human form, mostly given that she never mentions that, and she's more than happy to dangle all of the carrots in front of us at a long distance, of saving our friends and whatnot, as long as we do what she says. But that is never one of the carrots that she dangles. So I took it to mean that she thought that we were just going to be her kind of steed the whole time, and she was going to use these weapons to give herself a fighting edge. And obviously, as we find out later, she has no idea how to use a sword or a shield, which makes sense given who she is and what she is. So yeah.
Do you think that this should have been a human Link section? Because by the time we get done with it, we have been Wolf Link for a really long time. Like, we go through a whole, we meet Ordona, we go back into the Twilight, we reclaim Tears of Light and all that. I'm just wondering, I know that it's probably serving to just reinforce the main gimmick of the game, which is that you can transform into a wolf, right? But I'm wondering if it wouldn't have been more fun if we just meet Ordona as soon as we get back, who changes us back into human Link, because then you would get the sword and shield, you would still have to go into the Twilight and turn back into Wolf Link. Yeah. And then the sequence of events would still mostly be the same. But I don't know. I'm kind of, even though this section of Wolf Link stuff was more entertaining than what we did last week, I still do think that it is just a really probably too long chunk of time that you're just stuck in that form.
Yeah, I do agree. I think there are two narrative points that would require you to be Wolf Link for this, and that is Midna's realization that she is not going to be the armed heavy, and that and Wolf Link getting these things without being able to tell his neighbors that he's on the case. So at this point in time, the people of Ordon Village still believe that they are entirely on their own. No one is coming to save them, and it is up to them to save their children. And that is woven throughout their characterization in this section. And I think if Human Link shows back up and says, hey, give me the sword and shield, I'm going to go look for the kids, then you lose some of what you get from their characters in the doggedness to save their kids.
Yeah, I think that is a good point. Like narratively, I see why this is an important thing to do. I guess what I'll leave this point with is just the hope that we don't have another section of the game where you spend this much unbroken time as Wolf Link. I know that there's like more flexibility later in the game about, when you can transform to and from that form. But it is just a little bit much. So once we have our sword and shield, we meet the first of the light spirits of Twilight Princess, which is the spirit Ordona, who is the namesake of the Ordona province, a big goat, which is appropriate, right? Very cool looking light spirit. I did think it was very interesting. I mean, this is a pretty big lore addition to the world of Hyrule, right? It's pretty ingrained throughout the history of at least recent Zelda games that you have Faron, Eldin, and Lanayru as basically the three main regions, spirits. Dragons associated with them, all those things. Ordona is not one that we ever really hear of again after Twilight Princess. So I thought it was very interesting that he does introduce himself as one of the four guardian spirits of Hyrule. And it makes me wonder why we've never kind of like, why does Ordona not get the longevity in the Zelda series that Faron and Eldin and Lanayru do?
And like this is a different kind of concept to guardian spirits for Hyrule than we've ever really gotten. Like I can't think of a time when this trope is utilized in any other game. It's normally sages who are over a temple or great fairies and they're not even like over anything. They're just kind of in a region and trapped. So it is interesting. And I really kind of like this idea of structuring guardians of the land in this way. I think it's cool. And I really like how it utilizes a guardian animal that is attuned to this area of the world in such an intimate way. So it is kind of a shame that this isn't revisited elsewhere. Not even necessarily Ordon and the other light spirits that we meet later, but not even just them by name. But I think it's an interesting, the guardian spirit trope is a very interesting one that I kind of wish was revisited.
Yeah, I do think it's fun to be organizing the world of Hyrule a bit more into provinces like this. That kind of gives it a bit of realism, right? A real kingdom would probably be arranged in much a similar way. And, in fairness, this is the first game in the series that we hear the terms Eldin, Farour, and Lanayru, right?
Yes.
They didn't exist prior to Twilight Princess. They get used a lot after that. They feel a little bit more familiar because the root words of those names are the goddesses that we have heard the names of before, right? It's Farour, Nehru, and Din, right?
Yep.
So maybe they just feel a little bit more familiar than Ordona does. But regardless, I do think fictionally it's a pretty cool arrangement of things as well. Having a guarding spirit spring in each province is a cool concept. And it really helps to, like you were saying before, establish those areas as being spiritually important, which just from a lore standpoint, I think is a lot of fun. I do think it's nice meeting one of these spirits and not having to put it back together after the Twilight creatures have ripped it apart, right?
Yes.
Like later on, we have to do that for Faron, but we managed to get Ordona off the hook before any of that really ever happens. That also gets us into our first fight with one of the creatures of Twilight, right? I mean, we fought some of the trash monsters in the sewer last week, but this is one of the main bad guys, right, that we fight throughout the entire rest of the game. They're kind of pushovers, aren't they?
When they're by themselves, they are very easy. Yes. I literally did my jump attack twice on him and he died. And I think it's really cool as Wolf Link that you can latch onto these larger enemies and just kind of bite at them. I thought that was kind of neat. It felt very German Shepherd police dog. So that was cool. And yeah, in my plot recap, I referenced that at least, I always write the plot recaps from my perspective. I killed this guy before he even moved from his original spawning position. So yeah, it's definitely, when they're alone, really no big deal.
Do you wish that there was a bit more of like a combat loop here? Because I'm trying to think. I know that there are some boss adjacent enemies that we fight as Wolf Link later in the game, but other than that, there's really no enemy type that is tailored specifically to fighting against you as Wolf Link and taking advantage of like Wolf Link's abilities and the way that he controls. So I don't know. Do you wish that there was a bit more of like a combat learning curve to these guys? I know that we get a little bit of that later when they start ganging up on you, but it still doesn't really qualify, I don't think.
I think I would be more interested in that if Wolf Link combat was more interesting, but it's not. So I'm just kind of fine with with this the way that it is.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Moving on from Ordona's Spirit Spring, literally just a hop, skip, and a jump down the road, once we go back through the barrier of Twilight, is the spiritual spring of the Faron region. These two are very close together. Like, geographically, the Ordon Spring and the Faron Spring are just down the road from each other, right?
Yeah.
Which I thought was very interesting. But this gets us into our first experience with reclaiming Tears of Light and using them to dispel Twilight from a region and to reassemble one of the light spirits. And we have already mentioned the similarities that this has to Silent Realms. And so I'm going to ask you right up front, Matt, do you think that this is a better activity than Silent Realms are in Skyward Sword? Because it's the same sort of thing, right? Like, you get given a vessel of some kind that's got a lot of little pods on it, and each one of those pods has to be filled up with a collectible, and then once you've filled it up, then you're out of that activity, and you get back into normal things. So very similar on their face.
Yeah, I think that's kind of where their similarities end, though, because this is not timed, it doesn't have an insta-fail mechanic, and it doesn't have a stealth mechanic to it. So I think it's a little bit of apples to oranges, because this is really a full exploration of the world in a different way. So like where the Silent Realms are gated off and in many cases significantly different in as far as what you can access. This is exactly the way that it's laid out as Human Link, but you can access different areas because you're Wolf Link with Midna's jump ability. I do like this instance of it. I remember from my last playthrough that I got bored of these fairly quickly, but this instance was good, I think, because you got to explore an area that you've already explored in a different way. You got to access areas that you weren't able to access as Human Link, and you interacted with the world in a significantly different way from normal. So I liked this section well enough. It wasn't overly complicated. It wasn't, I didn't like spend half an hour looking for the last little bug somewhere. And there was some minor puzzle solving, not anything major. So like it was good. I wouldn't say that like, I don't know how much this game would lose if it lost these sections of the game, if you know what I mean.
Right, but then I think at that point the question would be, if we don't have these anymore, then what's the point of even having Wolf Link?
Right.
As a thing, right?
These sections are entirely to justify the existence of Wolf Link, for sure, 100%.
Yeah. It does set up an interesting thing that you can do with this whole characters that you can meet in the real world are shades of themselves in the Twilight realm. Especially so like in this section that happens when you're able to get into Lantern Guy's house, right? And you can see interactions, like what those characters are going through from like their perspective within the Twilight, right? Which I think is kind of a fun little thing that gets done a lot throughout the entire rest of the game too. But it is fun, and I do think that it makes these sections of the game feel more narratively important than the Silent Realms, just because the Silent Realms are completely different plane. Yeah, they're different planes of existence from the main world that you're in Skyward Sword. They look similar, but they're not the same. And this feels a little bit more intrinsically tied to the world that you've already gotten to know. It does feel nice because there is something here to save, right? Like there's an actual set of stakes where characters that you've met and areas that you've been are in peril, and you have to free them from that.
Yeah, I think the lantern guy specifically, seeing his interaction with the bugs, he can see the bugs and he's afraid of the bugs. He can't see you, and he doesn't understand why the bugs all of a sudden disappeared. Like, I think that's interesting world building for sure. One thing I wanted to call out specifically about the bugs is they refute something we said last episode, which is that you can't heal as Wolf Link. But when you pick up the orbs of light that the bugs drop, they heal a whole heart. So that was really, really nice.
Yeah, it's definitely a much needed avenue towards regaining health in this form, especially in hero mode, right, where you're not getting heart drops from things. But like in a game with a hero mode where you're not getting heart drops from grass and whatnot, not having access to potions and things or fairies is a big issue with that whole system. But this is a way to circumvent that, and I did appreciate that it was there. Completely agree with you on that. And it is, like you were saying, it's cool to see Twilight Faron Woods as Wolf Link from a different perspective, right? Because you're correct, there are a lot of like little nooks and crannies and hollowed out trees and stuff that you can get in as Wolf Link that you couldn't as Human Link. So it really does. It's the same thing that we were talking about with Ordon Village, right? Where it's a space that we've already been, but now we're kind of seeing the layers of it just a little bit more, which is good. I think that this was fun enough for me. I think a lot of that is just down to the fact that it doesn't really overstay its welcome, at least as of right now. It probably didn't take me longer than 20-ish minutes to reclaim all the Tears of Light and to reassemble the Light Spirit Faron. And so maybe I'll have differing thoughts about these sections later in the game once they become longer and more complicated. But for right now, it's totally fine. Light Spirit Faron is probably the most majestic looking monkey that I think I've ever seen in a video game.
Definitely the most majestic looking monkey, and especially compared to the monkeys we see later. This guy is in a league of his own, for sure.
Yeah, the true god of monkeys right here. But this is a really fun moment, right? Because once we reassemble the Light Spirit, we get to change back into Human Link form, and this is where we get the big reveal of, hey, look, you're wearing the outfit.
Yes. Yes. Huge big reveal. I love seeing Link's kind of shock and awe at himself, like kind of going, whoa, I clean up good. And I kind of liked that character moment for him. And man, kind of maybe contrary opinion, maybe not. This may be my favorite hero outfit. Like it's really good looking. It's got layers of chainmail. It's got a sturdy bracer. It's got a dark green tunic, whereas some of the greens that you get are like really light green. A lot of the hero clothes look like just kind of clothes. This looks like kind of Skyward Swordy with the armor motif, but a little more sturdy than even Skyward Swords does.
Well, this is really the first time where you see this outfit and it has layers to it, I guess, right? I mean, you can see little bits of chainmail poking out around the neckline area and around the sleeves. You see stitching and seams and stuff on the actual garments. It's kind of like what we were talking about last week, where the aesthetic of this game really seems to be Ocarina of Time, but we can just do more, Mm-hmm. And I do think that it's a really good version of the Link hero outfit. This version of Link, when he's wearing this outfit, looks a little skinny to me. And I've kind of always thought that. Like, I've always sort of felt like this version of Link looks like he could stand to maybe hit the gym.
I think Stephanie in our Discord would disagree with you. She's very thirsty for this version of Link.
Yeah, sorry, Stephanie. I do think overall it is a really great outfit, though. I think it's funny that like the Light Spirits have just been holding on to Link's clothes ever since Ocarina of Time.
This trope of the hero being gifted clothes makes the least sense in this game than any other game, in my opinion, because every other time it's like, except Ocarina of Time, that one is straight creepy, where Rauru has dressed you while you've been unconscious for 7 years. So that one is just gross. This one is just weird of like, why would a spirit have this? Where would a spirit keep it? How did the spirit give it to me? Like, you don't pull it out of a chest. You don't put it on. It's just like, oh, you spawn back into human form from being Wolf Link and you are fully dressed.
Well, and it's even weirder because as far as we know, adult Link was not a thing in this timeline, right? Mm-hmm. Adult Link was specific to the the adult timeline branching off of Ocarina.
And technically Downfall.
Right, which no longer exists here. So I guess the implication is that after returning from Termina, Link did grow up and do some hero things in these clothes, I guess.
Just kept them.
Yeah.
That was kind of my headcanon as well, is like, I can't imagine young Link being content to a life of farmerness, no matter how peaceful that might be. He's got that hero itch that he's got to scratch now, and he's got the clothes to do it, and he probably kept them or upgraded them and kind of through his life as an adult turned them into what we see. So I think that makes sense. Now, how they got to a light spirit that by all accounts didn't exist in the child timeline, unclear. And like you said, Lyndon, things that are implied rather than outright stated are sometimes better for the Zelda timeline. So let's just take it as young Link used these clothes in his knight-errant days and passed them on to the safekeeping of the sages, who then passed them on to the light spirits for when the hero was needed next.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about Ocarina of Time Link, I think, here in just a minute. But yeah, for now, I think that's a good enough explanation, good enough headcanon. So we return Light to the Pharaon region, and we get charged by the Light Spirit Pharaon to go into the Forest Temple and do what we seem to always be doing, which is to go and remove an evil that's recently taken up residence there, right?
In what I assume to be the remains of the Great Deku Tree.
Yeah, okay, so I want to talk about that in a second, but I was just kind of curious. I was wondering what I understand why Midna would be kind of driving us towards the temple because she's got her own agenda, right? Mm-hmm. But I was very curious why Pharaon wants us to go there, because it's not like the evil that is in the temple is something that was causing the Twilight in Pharaon Woods, right? Like, we've already solved that problem.
I think it's because the evil that resides in the tree is infecting the woods at large. It's creating the monsters that are still there, the bokoblins, the dekubabas, the keese. So it's still making the woods a dangerous environment instead of the woodland paradise for the monkeys, who I kind of am assuming that the monkeys are what the Koroks turned into. So that's kind of where my headcanon's going.
They're
way too intelligent to be just monkeys.
It's interesting. I don't know about that. It did have me wondering, do we think that Pharaon region, as it's presented here, and maybe even Ordona province, do we think that we are existing, that we're taking up residence now in what used to be Kokiri Forest? Was that your read on it?
That was my read on it, mostly because I can't imagine another tree of this colossal size that isn't the Great Deku Tree. So, like, to me, the Forest Temple reads as the Great Deku Tree 1,000 years later is now dead, and the spirit that was within the Great Deku Tree became the Pharaon Light Spirit, and the husk of the Great Deku Tree became the Forest Temple, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I've totally have thought ever since the first time I played Twilight Princess that this region is kind of Kokiri Forest and Kokiri Forest adjacent.
I think that theory holds up really well until we get later into the game and we start seeing some of the truly wild, like, geographic arrangement of some things, right?
Well, something one of our Discord patrons pointed out to us was that we're playing in hero mode where the map is totally mirrored and flipped. So it is not as wild in the original GameCube version. Things more line up with where they're supposed to be.
Yeah, there's still some pretty big stuff just kind of moving around here.
For sure. There's some very big weirdness that happens regardless of which version you play. But yes, to your point.
But again, it's the Legend of Zelda, right? Yeah, so exactly. It's best not to be too legalistic about these things. We make it back through Pharaon Woods. Doesn't take very long at all. We have a good sword. We have a good shield now, and it takes approximately 5 minutes to cut through a few trash enemies to get back in front of what is the Forest Temple and what we're assuming to have been the remains of the great Deku Tree from Ocarina of Time.
R.I.P. Tree Pope.
R.I.P. Tree Pope. We do have a very notable character interaction that takes place before we enter the temple. So on our way into the temple, we meet a holy looking counterpart to ourselves, right?
Really cool looking.
This is a absolutely badass looking glowing gold wolf, which leads us to a really cool interaction with what appears to be a Stalfos.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
he's the coolest looking Stalfos that's ever existed,
and by far the most personable.
Definitely, he talks to you rather than straight up attacking you, although he does attack you. But just want to talk about I think it's called the Hero's Shade in this instance. But if you didn't know, it's called the Hero's Shade. I think it's introed there. Please look this up and edit it out if it's not. But this Stalfos, the armor that he wears, it's really cool. It's golden and red, and he's got a cool sword that looks almost like the Ordon sword, but like longer and a little more ornate. And he's got a large metal round shield, one glowing red eye. Like this is a really, really cool character design. And his armor is crusted with some ivy. Looks like it's ancient and has maybe been moldering in a tomb somewhere. Like the character design is flawless on this character.
Yeah, looks amazing and kicks off a really cool little segment, which is repeated later on throughout the game. We kind of learn the process by which we go about acquiring new combat techniques, which is a thing that more recent Zelda games do a lot of, right? Mm-hmm. Acquiring new combat skills and certain moves that you can activate at different times. And I know that this is not the first instance of this necessarily. I know that Wind Waker had a version of this as well. But I do think that this is just like a really cool system by which to acquire new moves. You're basically being like Obi-Wan trained by the Hero Shade every time you do this. And I think it's really, really cool. It sets up a really fun mystery at this early point of the game, right? Like it adds just one extra fun layer of, the feeling of Hyrule being a magical world with, layers of things and realities and echoes of things and having like some deep lore that's happening here. It's just a really fun interaction. And, so the character kind of tells you, yes, be looking out for my golden wolf form as you go forth in your journey. And I think it's fun because that really sets up a fun side quest, right? Mm-hmm. It sets up a pursuit that you want to take part in, right? Like you get a very immediate, cool reward for doing this in the form of the final blow, which is awesome every single time you do it.
So much fun.
It's kind of pointless when you're fighting bokoblins because it's like
they die in 2 hits anyway.
Well, so this is what I noticed. If you stab them twice, then they die. If you jump attack them, then they fall on the ground and you can final blow and do that whole thing, and it looks really cool. But isn't the jump attack supposed to be more powerful than just your regular stab? So I'm a little unclear as to why the jump attack isn't one-hit KOing bokoblins. I'm willing to overlook it because doing the final blow...
1.5 instead of double.
Is it? Okay.
I think it's 1.5.
All right. Well, doing the final blow is cool enough to where it's not like a problem, but I was just a little curious about that.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite things that you didn't mention about this whole interaction is the whole training sequence takes place in a dreamland version overlooking Hyrule Castle, which is really cool set piece for training in this context. And learning combat moves is probably my most favorite side quest in any game in general. Like anytime that I know that I can go somewhere, train up, and learn a unique, powerful, useful combat tool, I'm going to go do that 100% of the time. And like this is done really well where it's not like Wind Waker's version where you have to hit the dude 100 times without getting hit yourself. It's not Phantom Hourglass's weird trading quest. It's very focused in you're doing combat training to learn a combat move, and I love that. I think it's really great. So this aspect of Twilight Princess is one of my favorite aspects of the game in general.
The dialogue here is really great too because this character is kind of talking to you like you're a plebe, basically, and is
you are.
Yeah, exactly. And saying, hey, you're wearing the hero's clothes, but you're not a hero yet. You need to get stronger. Once you become stronger, come and find me.
Yep.
And I think that's cool because a lot of times I think in Zelda games, Link gets treated early game as being kind of a badass already. Like that does happen sometimes. And I like this because even though there's not really a gameplay extension of this concept, like Link doesn't feel noticeably weaker or anything here than he does at any other point in the game, barring like upgrades to swords and things like that.
Yeah.
It is still cool from a fictional standpoint, right? Like yesterday you were herding goats and now you're wearing the hero's clothes. We need to train you up.
Yeah. I always loved the hero's journey. Like I think good fantasy literature especially has really well-constructed heroes' journeys. And Zelda has not always done that super well. It normally throws you in fully formed as the hero, or at least like you're not significantly different in your base abilities from the beginning of the game to the end of the game. So seeing the hero's journey portrayed this way with a mentor figure that imparts ancient wisdom to turn you into the hero that you're supposed to be is really fun. So yeah, love it all the way around.
Do we have anything else we want to say about the intro section of this? Do we have anything else we want to say in part 2 before we go ahead and move on to the dungeon map?
What did you think about the toxic gas section, both Wolf Link form and human form? Wolf Link, you just kind of avoid it with Midna, and in human form, you have to follow the monkey around with the swinging lantern.
Well, so one thing I want to say about that just up front before I talk about the actual process of doing it is I think it's hilarious when you come back to Lantern Guy, right? And he's like, oh, hey, there's a fog deeper in Faron Woods. And if you don't have a full lantern, you're not going to be able to get through it. Buy some lantern oil from me for 100 rupees, right? And
it's insanely overpriced.
Right. And then you're just kind of like, I think I don't want to do that. And he's like, oh, come on, man. I gave you the lantern for free. And I'm here like, dude, that's a you problem. Like,
you're just a bad businessman. That's not my issue to solve.
Yeah, exactly. But it's also kind of misleading because I had a memory deep down in the dark corners of my mind that you didn't actually need to have a full lantern's worth of oil in order to do this next part. Once the monkey takes your lantern from you,
it just gets full.
Yeah, it's like what you could have next to no oil in that thing and you could still get all the way through this whole little section and the lantern will still be empty at the end of it. So
yes.
So yeah, absolutely save yourself the rupees. Don't buy lantern oil for 100 rupees from this guy because what you're going to do is top off your lantern maybe like a quarter or a third, and then it's still going to be empty at the very end of this whole thing. It's unless you're completely out of oil, unless you have no lantern oil whatsoever, which I'm not sure what you were using your lantern for. But if you have none, then yeah, you've got no choice. But if you have even a little bit of oil left, just go forward, let the monkey take your lantern. I don't know that I felt like this whole, aside from establishing the monkey as being a helpful figure, which kind of carries throughout the entire dungeon section as well, I just don't really see the point, you know? It really just serves to slow your progress through this area before you get to the dungeon. You don't really run into any tricky combat during the fog. If you had to like defend the monkey against like waves of enemies or something, then maybe I would feel a little differently about it. But all that you're really having to do here is a thing that I always hate in video games, which is slowly follow a slow-moving NPC and just kind of wait on it to do a thing.
Yeah, I hate this trope almost as much as I hate escort missions, which this basically is an escort mission. Like the monkey will stop if it's afraid of any enemies nearby, so you have to kill the enemies to keep moving forward. It's just there's no point to these. It just, like you said, it slows everything down for no reason other than to utilize all of your lantern oil for some reason. My question, and I understand why you didn't buy the lantern oil. It's the same reason I didn't buy the lantern oil. Until I got to the other side of the fog, I thought back on it, and I thought to myself, what if he was selling me another full bottle so that's how you get your second bottle? And I don't remember if that's the case or not. Like, does your 100 rupees get you another bottle and that bottle is filled with lantern oil?
Google that real quick.
That's exactly what it does. Dang it!
Oh my gosh, I missed a bottle?
Yeah, we both missed a bottle. Crap! Okay, well, spend the 100 rupees and buy the bottle.
Yeah, I was going to say, now I feel bad because, like, I mean, for 100 rupees, like...
That's a steal!
Yeah, that's a great deal. Like, I wish I'd given the guy the money. Oh, man. All right. Well, I thought he was trying to swindle us, and it turns out that he was actually trying to give us truly a mighty gift. Bottles in the Zelda series are one of the most powerful items a person can acquire. So, okay.
I feel like such an idiot.
All right. Well, but I mean, in fairness, like, it did just seem like, hey, buy 100 rupees worth of lantern oil. Okay.
And I didn't have an empty bottle on me anyway, so... Yeah, I didn't have an empty bottle on me anyway, so like I was thinking, I'm not going to give you 100 rupees and then you just fill my lantern.
Well, and this was kind of crappy, right? Because I had a bottle full of milk from Ordon Village, and I knew that I was going to need more lantern oil before going into the forest temple. So I was going to get some from the parrot for 30 rupees, right? 20 rupees. But the issue is I only had the one bottle. So I was like, crap, well, I guess I've got to drink this milk now.
No, you can fill the lantern. You can just go up to the oil and dip it.
You
yes,
have
you can.
to. Really?
Yeah. Even so with the parrot and with the lantern oil guy, if you go up to it and interact with the oil with your lantern keyed, I normally key it to X. So if you go up and push X, you'll dip the lantern in it and fill the lantern all the way up, and then you pay the 20 rupees for that.
Damn it. Man, I did this like 5 different kinds of wrong.
So wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did this real wrong.
All right.
Crap.
Okay. Well, Lantern Guy, you're a real one, and I'm sorry for all the bad thoughts and feelings that I had when I thought you were trying to swindle me. I will happily go buy that bottle as soon as I log back into the game. But there you go. Learn from our failures. 2 bottles is way better than 1 bottle.
Yeah, absolutely. That will be my first stop on loading the game up probably tomorrow.
Oh, boy. Okay, let's move on to part 3, which is the dungeon map, where we discuss this week's dungeon from mechanics to music and more. This week's dungeon is the Forest Temple. We get a very familiar feeling cadence of temples in this game.
Yeah.
Forest to fire to water, right?
Yep. And then we're not going to go.
Sure, yeah. Something about that just feels right. This temple, I think, is very interesting because just from an aesthetic standpoint, you're right, Matt. It's very clearly the interior of the remains of the Deku Tree. And you know that not just because it looks that way from the outside and feels that way on the inside, but it has the Deku Tree's symbol on all the doors.
Yes.
Yeah.
Kind of a variation, right? Like it's got an extra little squiggly going off the side, but you would expect that after 1,000 years or whatever. So yeah.
So this dungeon, I think overall was one that was interesting to me and a pretty good time. Just to describe it a little bit real quick, it's all taking place on one floor. It's separated into 2 main sections. There's the introductory section, and then the back half of the dungeon is inaccessible right up front. There's a chasm that runs right through the whole middle of the thing. And you try to get over it early on, but the bridge falls out. And so you've got to find a way to get across the chasm into the back half of the dungeon. The way that the dungeon is arranged is that there's lots of different little corridors and rooms with imprisoned monkeys contained all through them. The monkey that you meet in Faron Woods is very clearly trying to like move you towards her friends to free them from their prisons. And as you unlock more monkeys, you can make your way further into the temple because they make little rope swing bridges for you. Main enemies that we're going to encounter in here are going to be mostly Deku Babas, and then the more creepy and malevolent version of those, the big red ones that kind of like munch on you if you don't kill them quick enough.
Yep.
We see a lot of keys in here. We see flowers that launch you if you try to jump over them.
Or if you try to final blow someone too close to them.
Yeah. Did that happen to you, Matt?
Yes.
Okay. We see an interesting take on bomb flowers, which isn't a flower at all. It's a bomb bug, which I thought was very interesting. We don't usually get bomb-based puzzles this early on in the game. But so and from an aesthetic standpoint, it is the hollowed out insides of a massive tree. Mini boss is a baboon possessed by Twilight that holds a boomerang, and the main boss of the dungeon is a giant Deku Baba by the name of Daya Baba. So. Yeah. So that's a quick rundown on the dungeon. You know what I really like about this whole space, Matt, is that
Tell me, Lyndon.
it feels like the Deku Tree, but more and more dangerous.
Yeah. This is another one of those Twilight Princess is echoing Ocarina of Time in a very specific homage. And I think this is one of the areas where it works to Twilight Princess's advantage.
Oh, Skulltulas too, by the way.
Yeah. Oh, the Skulltulas are so creepy in this game.
The big Skulltulas look absolutely terrifying in this game. I mean,
Arachnophobia nightmares.
Yeah, they are nightmare fuel to the extreme.
I think utilizing the corpse of Tree Pope is a really good set piece to ground you because let's place the game in time, right? So it's 2006. So Ocarina of Time came out in 1998.
Yes.
1998. So you assume like 8-year-old you is playing Ocarina of Time. Well, now in 2006, that's 8 years later. You're 16. So this feels like this feels like a Deku Tree temple designed for a 16-year-old instead of an 8-year-old. And so I really think that the Nintendo team was taking Twilight Princess to be the spiritual successor to Ocarina of Time, targeted at the people who played Ocarina of Time as kids and who fell in love with the Zelda series because of Ocarina of Time. And the specific choice to ground the opening temple into this area, which feels familiar, which is so obviously an homage to that intro temple of Ocarina of Time, but to upscale it to be more dangerous, to be more puzzle-based, to be much larger, to be more adult and scary, was a really good and interesting, well-played design choice by the Nintendo team that I think works really, really well for this game overall. I will say, originally, at the first couple minutes of this temple, when I'm just following the monkey around, I was like, man, I really do not want these monkeys leading me places, or I don't want to be following these monkeys throughout the whole temple. And I followed them for a while, but eventually they do fall off and like hang out in the main area or later in the area where you have to free like I think there's 10 of them or something. So eventually they fall off and they're not accompanying you everywhere. So that was really good that they didn't follow you through the whole freaking dungeon. So I really do think this was well played overall from a design perspective, from a set piece perspective, and from a intro dungeon challenge perspective. I think it was really well done.
Yeah, as tag-along characters in a dungeon, the monkeys really aren't a hassle, which is nice.
They don't get in your way.
Yeah, they don't. They're kind of cute. I like the design of these monkeys.
Yeah, I would definitely throw myself in front of a Deku Baba for a monkey before I would for like, I don't know, most other NPCs in the Zelda universe.
Yeah. And it is really nice because I think that, Wind Waker sort of started this tradition in the mainline, like 3D Zelda games of the intro dungeon not really being as much of a pushover as they have been at times. And Twilight Princess really continues that tradition. The Forest Temple is not short.
No.
It is not a short dungeon. It's not... I don't want to say it's like blisteringly hard or anything, But there are puzzles in here that do require thought and critical thinking to figure out the solutions. And there are some pretty trickety-trick little things that you can definitely miss if you're not paying attention. And so I really do like that. I think that there's no reason in the world that Dungeon 1 has to be just total easy mode. And so I love it when that isn't the case, and it's definitely true here. I mean, we do get some pretty classic takes on Zelda puzzles, right? Having to use our slingshot to shoot sculptulas off of walls, right? And
lighting lanterns,
and
extinguishing lanterns,
yeah, things like that. But I mean, there are new takes on all of those things that are in here, right? Yeah, bombable walls for sure. But I do think that overall this is a very fun dungeon with a really great atmosphere. The mini boss, which let's just talk about that, really fun to have mini bosses back, especially after Phantom Hourglass, right, where we were just kind of saying like, I wish there were mini bosses in these dungeons. And even after Wind Waker, which did not have mini bosses in every or even any of the dungeons. Did any of them have mini bosses?
I don't remember there being mini bosses.
Nothing jumps to mind. Tell us if we're wrong.
They will.
Yeah. But anyway, I did like having a mini boss with like a whole setup in here, right? Like facing the possessed baboon in that little arena was a lot of fun. And there was a really fun mechanic that you had to use to actually defeat him that you have to think about for a second, right? Like I spent a few minutes kind of running around trying to escape the boomerang throws from possessed baboon, trying to figure out like how do I'm shooting him with a slingshot, that's not doing anything. Nothing really seems to be working for me here. But then once you think about it for a second, you realize, oh, boomerang come back. That's like
that's the whole point of a boomerang.
That's the whole point of the boomerang. And then knowing that you can roll into the little columns that baboon is standing on. It's a really fun kind of got it moment, right? When you figure out like, okay, I've got to roll into the column and knock baboon off balance so that the boomerang can hit him when it comes back around. And that's really fun, right? Like that's a fun interaction. It's a fun fight. And there is some level of precision timing that's kind of required to make that work.
Yeah, and I think you're kind of skipping past a secondary mini boss. The precursor to the Diababa, who snatches up the small key, and you have to do. That's kind of where you learn the mechanics of dodge the big Deku Baba head, smack it around, and then throw the bomb when you can throw it into the flower in the middle. So there's really like two mini bosses in this dungeon, which were both good. Like I think we'll call him Mini Baba.
Yeah.
Mini Baba was not hard by any stretch of the imagination.
But it does what we like to see happen in dungeons, which is kind of educate you as you progress through it and give you information that will be helpful later on, right? So you're saying here that you learn some things that are very useful when you actually have to go and fight the boss later. And that's great. Like, I think that's one of the hallmarks of a good dungeon in the Zelda series, which is a learning curve that kind of progresses from the moment you walk in and just kind of adds more and more and more stuff on top as you progress through it up until the end of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And going back to your discussion of the monkey boss, I really like the monkey boss, and it actually didn't take me any time at all to figure out what I needed to do, just because there were a couple of puzzles leading up to this where you had to knock things off of the wooden pillars by rolling into them. You had to free your first monkey by doing that. You had to get a chest down. I don't think you had to get the chest down. I think it contained like some rupees or something. But
it's a chest on top of a thing. So.
Yeah, so you know you want to get it. So like the dungeon does a really good job of pointing these things out without like signposting like this is the mechanic. It's just like this is a cool thing, like figure it out, and then utilizing that throughout the dungeon in a meaningful capacity, and it does it very, very well. I think the number of times that you smack the monkey's ass with your sword. Like, look, this comes back to one of my main gripes with Wind Waker is I don't really love it when Zelda goes goofy in this way. And the whole monkey smacking its booty and then you having to hit hit the booty with the sword. Like that stuff just, I don't know. It doesn't jive with me as well. I get it. It's kind of comic relief. It's kind of funny, but I don't know. That doesn't really work for me. But that is a very minor gripe for what overall I thought was a really excellent mini boss battle, which nets you the Gale Boomerang, which is a really cool item and has something that we loved about the Wind Waker Boomerang, which is multi-target lock. And I love that. It's really, really great.
So, all right, let's talk about the Gale Boomerang. In my mind, I always remember this as being lesser Boomerang in the Zelda series, right?
Really?
Yes, because, well, I mean, we get a lot of boomerangs in a lot of different Zelda games, and a lot of them are better than this one, even the ones that are more for puzzle solving in addition to combat, right? Mm-hmm. My issue with the Gale Boomerang is that it is almost entirely a puzzle solving tool, and it is pretty useless as an actual combat tool. It can momentarily stun some enemies, but it doesn't really stun them long enough to make it worth it, in my opinion. So, like, the puzzles that were given to solve with it are fun. And yes, I love the multi-lock-on function that boomerangs have in some of these games. Wind Waker is another good example of this. That's always great. And it is really fun to use in this dungeon. There are a lot of really fun Gale Boomerang puzzles in this dungeon. I don't want to talk too much about what happens more in the game past this point, but I will just say that one of the recurring criticisms of items in Twilight Princess is that once you have gotten past the dungeon where you have to use those to do a thing, you find yourself using them hardly ever.
Never.
Yeah. And they really don't serve much of a purpose after that point. And so it feels maybe a little unfair to mention that now because we haven't done any of that yet.
2020 thing.
Yeah, exactly. But, this is the boomerang's moment. We're talking about it as an item in this game. And I do think that its lack of versatility outside of just puzzle solving with it is kind of a knock against it. Like, I do think that it would be much more useful for a longer period of time in the actual game if it had a better use as an actual combat tool, which in fairness, the boomerang in Wind Waker did, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I found myself using the the boomerang in Wind Waker a fair amount just for the purposes of combat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's really fair. I really liked the puzzles that we solved with the boomerang in this dungeon. So I'll give it a solid, in this dungeon, solid A-. And one thing I actually kind of liked about this that I was just thinking about is the lore of the Gale Boomerang is that it's empowered with the spirit of the winds, or the fairy of the winds. And it made me think about the mother and child fairy in Wind Waker, who were the spirit of winds. So like this must be what the fairy of winds becomes in the child timeline where the world doesn't become flooded. And I think that's kind of cool.
Well, and the sound effect that plays too while the whole cutscene is happening, where it's explaining like, "Hi, I'm the Gale Boomerang and I'm the Fairy of Winds." It's the same wind sound from the Wind Waker, which was fun. That was a fun little callback to me.
Tie-in.
Yeah.
So A+ on narrative implications.
But there are a lot of fun, to your point, there's a lot of fun puzzle solving that you have to do with this thing. It's not just cutting down things that are hanging from spider webs. It's not just picking up bombs and moving them from one place to another, right? It's not even just the multi-lock-on functionality. One of my favorite puzzles in this entire dungeon is the one where previously you had to light lanterns to create a staircase to get up and free a monkey, right?
Yep.
Once you have the Gale Boomerang, what you figure out is the only way to get a treasure chest with a heart container or a piece of heart in it is you have to use the Gale Boomerang to extinguish those lanterns. That drops some staircases, and then you actually have access to a chest, which you could totally miss. Would be so easy to miss this.
Well, the Gale Boomerang also gets you the compass, which helps you not miss it, right? Like, I feel like the compass is a really, really useful item in dungeons in this game because it shows you where chests are. Like, I went back and got like 50 rupees worth of stuff that I had missed. I did get all the pieces of heart without having the compass, but it's going to be an interesting thing to be looking out for the compass in these dungeon sections. Speaking of, chests in the dungeon. Did you get the chests that had the Hylian alphabet stamps?
I only found one. Was there more than
There's
one?
two.
Okay. I got the letter N, I think.
The letter A was in the room where there's some water that you can accidentally fall into, and there's like a little offshoot on one of the corners that's super easy to miss.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, no, so I only got the one. I don't have any recollection of what these are for.
I was going to ask you if you did, because I don't remember these at all.
No, I have no idea what you do with these. So we'll figure
find
it out.
out.
Yeah, we'll figure it out later. Yeah, I want to go back to your point about the compass real quick, Matt, because so some Zelda games kind of combine the dungeon map and the compass into one thing, right? And then obviously a lot of games have them as separate things. I do think that so when I got the compass, I remember thinking it's weird that I'm getting it this late in the dungeon. This is usually something I like to get a lot earlier on. But when you're using it for the primary purpose of like finding chests that might have been easy to miss. Like if you have a dungeon and you've got a lot of chests in that dungeon, and if those chests have things that are desirable to find, like, so having 2 heart pieces in a dungeon is actually pretty abnormal for the Zelda series, right? Like some games have a heart piece in a dungeon, but
or none.
Yeah, or none. But to have 2 of them is actually kind of a big deal, especially in this game where it's 5 pieces of heart to a container and not 4.
Well, what I was going to say is I think that's why they have 2, is because you naturally need more heart pieces since you've split it into 5 instead of 4, which, by the way, I hate it.
But my thing is, if you have more optional but high value chests that are easy to miss in dungeons, then I think it's actually a pretty cool thing to be giving you the compass late in the dungeon, because at that point you've already got a lot of it unlocked. Like you've already been to most of those rooms, right? And so then it just becomes one extra layer of backtrack that you might need to do before going and beating the boss, where you're looking at the compass and being like, oh, I missed this chest and this chest and this chest. And if those chests are being hidden well, and if they have fun puzzles associated with finding them, like the extinguishing the lanterns one that we were just talking about, then I think it's a loop that plays really well together. And I was actually kind of impressed by that here. I typically think of the compass as being kind of a throwaway item in Zelda games because, to be honest, most Zelda games, at least in my experience, don't hide their chests very well in dungeons, right?
Totally agree.
They're not quite as sneaky as they are here. But if they're going to be sneaky, then great. Have a compass and let it do this. I think it's a few things that are playing really well together. What else do we want to say about the dungeon proper before we go and talk for a minute about Diababa?
I don't think I have a lot. I think using the Gale Boomerang to move around those segments of bridge that move with the wind was kind of neat. I think going and finding the monkeys is interesting. I wish there was slightly less backtracking to do that. In the back half of the dungeon, like there's a point where you have to like go super far forward to get a small key, go all the way back to go into a different room to then go into the other room. So like there's a bit of backtracking that happens there that I think could have shaved 15-ish minutes off of this dungeon that I didn't find super necessary. But yeah, I think other than that, I think we can move on to Diababa.
Okay. And I do agree with that. I mean, I think tasteful use of backtracking in a dungeon, I think, is a good thing. And when it's done well, that typically to me is the mark of a really well-planned dungeon in a Zelda game. I think one of the reasons we didn't see a lot of backtracking in Phantom Hourglass, even though the dungeons were long enough and they were entertaining enough from a puzzle standpoint, there was almost no backtracking just because the layout of the dungeons didn't really support that. Like that element of planning wasn't there. It definitely is here. And we'll see if that holds up throughout the rest of the game. To my recollection, it does. Yeah. So we'll see.
I think good backtracking in a dungeon is hallmarked by not noticing that you're backtracking. When you are noticing, like very obviously, that you are backtracking frequently or long stretches, I think that's when backtracking is not successful. Like if I go through a dungeon and I'm not sitting there thinking the whole time, like, oh man, I just had to backtrack 5 minutes worth of dungeon time to go back and find something. Like if the dungeon somehow makes me do that without me realizing it, that is good backtracking. But when I'm noticing it as I'm doing it, I think that is not as well designed backtracking as it could be.
Yep, I think that's a totally fair point. Okay, the dungeon boss. Let's talk about Diababa. So, for one thing, this is a pretty gnarly looking boss, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The design of this character is really excellent. This is a terrifying looking, crazy, like Venus flytrap looking ass thing. The fight itself is pretty fun. It's split mainly into 2 phases. Phase 1, which is where you have just the 2 heads, right? And you have to drop bombs into the mouths of those heads, which kind of causes them to like fall back into the poison water, And then phase 2, you get the main head in the middle that pops out, and of course that's where we get our eye in the mouth for some reason. But that's what you have to hit to kill it,
I mean,
Why is it in the mouth, Matt?
Zelda trope.
Yeah.
That's the answer.
Yeah. Okay. So the main crux of the fight, though, revolves around using the bomb bugs to get bombs into the mouth of Diababa, which then damages it and allows you to do damage to it with your sword. There's a really fun moment about halfway through the fight where Monkey Boss pops back in and starts like swinging on a rope from one side of the arena to the other. And he's there to help you. He's got bomb bugs that you can lock onto with your boomerang and kind of redirect them back onto the boss. Kind of a lot of stuff going on here. This is a real amusement park. This is a real amusement park ride of a boss fight. I thought, like the arena and the way it's all set up and everything. It's all very like, I don't know. It looks like something that you might see at Universal Studios.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a very busy fight as well. Like to your point about amusement park ride, like everything is very stationed. You're at one segment on the safe zone on the shore, and you can't go into the poison water, which is where the boss is. And the boss can only sometimes come onto the shore to attack you. And then above the poison water is your swinging objective, which is the second phase of the fight. So I see what you're saying by amusement park in that way. Like it feels very much like you're gonna stand over here with your laser gun, like Cabela's hunting game, and just right. So I get that. To me, this boss fight more than anything just felt busy. Like you're moving around a lot. There's a lot of moving parts. There's nothing stationary, which isn't a bad thing. I'm not saying this in a bad way, but there's just so many moving parts, and using your boomerang to lock onto the bomb to then lock onto your target and hit both heads and then hit the middle head and then hit the middle head with your sword. Like there's so many steps in this fight. It's very, especially coming from Phantom Hourglass, it feels more busy than anything there. It feels more busy than most fights in Wind Waker. It feels a lot more busy than any fight in Ocarina of Time. And, I'm not sure that works for me necessarily in the context of this game. Like, I think I could have used one less variable, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I kind of get where you're coming from for sure. I personally really like, I mean, yes, you're right. It is busy. I like Boss Monkey hopping back in to kind of help us out during this whole thing. Awesome. Yeah, I thought that was really fun. It does feel a little frantic, right? Where Boss Monkey is kind of like flying from one end of the arena to the other, and you are trying to manage boomerang lock-ons from the bomb that he's holding to the boss, and everything's moving really quickly. On the one hand, yes, that does feel kind of busy, but on the other hand, 3D Zelda games of this era were not leveraging pure combat difficulty in the way that we're
leveraging mechanical difficulty.
Right. It's more about timing and more about mechanical difficulty. And I do think that this is playing into that very well. The thing is that this boss, isn't really a pushover. And again, I just like seeing that in a first dungeon boss. I like having to try, which is nice. And I took some hits in here, right? Like,
Really?
Yeah, I did. I got hit by the small heads once or twice, and then when the big head was spewing poison all over the place, I didn't quite manage to avoid that. I was actually on 2 hearts when I went into this fight, and I had to pop my fairy.
I did not have to pop my fairy.
So, which I did. I really appreciate that even though it's hero mode, they still give you a fairy right before going in to the boss arena.
Big win.
Yeah.
I only got hit once by this boss, and it was a small head as I was trying to do some lock-on shenanigans with the swinging boss monkey. So let me see if I can codify this a little bit better. I think my qualm with the busyness is that the movement within this game is not smooth enough or fluid enough to support as much busy movement as you need. I think that Link moves kind of clunkily. I think the lock-on mechanics with the Gale Boomerang while you're trying to move is hard. So you have to like lock on to the bomb, and then you can do that with Z targeting or L targeting or whatever it is. But then you have to stop moving to then lock onto whatever head you want. And in that time, you can get hit if you're not careful, which is the one time I did get hit. So I don't think there's enough fluid movement to support the amount of busyness that there is in this fight.
I get that. I really do. I was feeling that maybe a little bit more acutely just because, well, I know you aren't using gyro controls anyway because you don't really like them. But I was missing them in this fight because I was noticing that the process of so once you've got your boomerang out, and once you get locked on to boss monkey, then having to control sticks over and then lock on to the boss separately from that, it was just taking a little bit longer than I really would have liked. I use gyro controls in Zelda games, and so it's the kind of thing where on a Wii U that had gyro controls enabled, my Steam Deck does not. I'm sure there's a way I could set that up, but I got the game running and I'm not messing with it. Yeah,
I think that's fair.
Yeah. It would just be a flick of the wrist to kind of get it moved and lined up,
Sure.
and would be a little quicker. So that was my biggest thing, but that's just kind of purely an issue of my own making and like the way that I'm playing this game. Overall, I really do think it's a fun enough boss fight. I'm not here trying to make an argument that it's like top 10 Zelda boss fights of all time, right? I don't think that. I do think that it does feel a little staged in some ways, and the juggling of mechanics and events within the fight is maybe not as fluid as it could be, to your point, Matt.
Yeah.
But perfectly fun.
Yeah, I don't think this is a bad boss fight by any stretch of the means, and I don't want to come across as saying that this is bad. I think that this is, especially for a first dungeon, this is a good boss fight. This is not Goma in Wind Waker boss fight. That one was great.
Yeah, but it's also not Goma in Ocarina of Time,
which was
boss fight.
Not great. Yeah,
right, yeah,
for sure. This is in the middle. Yeah, I think it's a good boss fight.
Yeah. I will say that when the heart dropped, there was a brief split second where I just stood in front of it and thought to myself, do I want to 3-heart this thing?
No.
Do I want to do that?
How about no?
And it was just a split second, and I decided not to do it because the reality is that I just don't know Twilight Princess well enough as a game to be able to do that. I'll 3-heart an Ocarina of Time run any old day of the week,
sure.
Because I know that game like the back of my hand. But but yeah, no. But I did have the thought. All right. So give me half points for being momentarily brave and then completely abandoning it.
I will give you 0 points.
Thank you. All right, let's go ahead and get out of the dungeon map, move on to part 4, which is Bloopy Trails, where we talk about fascinating things that diverted our attention.
Look at all my Bloopy Trails, Lyndon. They're in my hand. They're right here. Do you see them?
I'm squinting.
There are none.
No Bloopy Trails. Huh. I get the joke now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Podcasting is definitely a visual medium, so all of our listeners also got the joke.
Yeah, okay. I love it. It works on so many levels, Matt. You should be proud of yourself.
I'm so proud of myself.
Yeah, really nothing here. I mean, I don't know.
I don't think you could have gotten any Bloopy Trails.
Yeah. I mean, the hero shade doesn't count.
Nope.
Because you have to do that in order to get to the dungeon. I don't think you can avoid it.
Nope.
The closest thing I can really think of is just that bottle that we missed, but
it doesn't even really count.
Yeah. So, all right. Bloopy Trails is going to be on hiatus for a week. Let's move on to part 5, which is Z targeting, where we lock on to fascinating characters or enemies that we happen to cross. Matt, I'm going to do the magnanimous thing and let you go first.
My Z targeting this week is Parrot Bird Shopkeeper, because this motherfucker killed me twice. I accidentally stole lantern oil from him. I refilled my lantern and I went to turn around and pay him and accidentally took one step too far and got outside of the fencing, and he started attacking me. And every time he hits you, it does a half a heart. So I'm panicking, trying to go over to his donation box and hit A, and instead I keep hitting A on the red potion, which I can't get, and then I keep hitting A on the red potion, and I keep getting hit, and then I died. And so I went back after I respawned to try to pay him. Same thing. As soon as you step within his visual field, he attacks you. Couldn't make it to the donation box. So I said, screw it. So I died again and went away. Went into the dungeon, and then I needed to go back to get red potion so I could heal up after taking some hits from stupid things. So I steeled myself for the assault. And I went in and I filled my bottle with red potion because, again, I accidentally clicked on the red potion instead of the donation box. And then I finally was able to click on the donation box and pay him for both the red potion and the lantern oil. So he finally stopped attacking me. I had half a heart left, so I drank my red potion, refilled it, and paid him again. So I ended up paying 100 rupees to this stupid bird. 80 rupees to this stupid bird because the controls in this game are not finely tuned enough to differentiate between his payment box and the red potion, and I was so angry.
So I will say there are a few times this week that I was having Z targeting confusion, right? Where like I was trying to target one thing, but there was another thing in the immediate vicinity and it was not hitting the right thing.
Yes.
So I definitely agree. There's a little bit of fine tuning here that it feels like we could have had another pass that would have made it feel a little better. This is one of those things that back in early days of the pod, when we were talking about ways in which Twilight Princess occasionally feels a little clunkier than other Zelda games, this is one of those examples that I was really thinking of. It's a problem that I don't really recall Wind Waker ever having, honestly. So anyway, but yeah, no, great Z targeting there, Matt. This game has got a lot of birds that will murder kill you.
Yes.
So that's fun. Also, yet another in a grand tradition of Zelda characters who maintain a shop that you can steal from.
Like I totally could. I would have never gone back to this bird, except I really needed to refill my red potion just in case I needed it in the dungeon. And in hindsight, I really could have skipped that because I ended up getting the second piece of heart right after I refilled the red potion. So I was super annoyed at having wasted 80 rupees when I could have just never come back to this bird's shop ever again and been totally fine.
Yeah, it's one of those things. So I bought red potion and lantern oil from the bird. And in the back of my mind, I'm kind of thinking like, I'm just going to run off and steal this stuff from you. But I am,
feel bad about it?
Yeah, I'm incapable of making ethically bad decisions in video games. Like even in like, Mass Effect, Knights of the Old Republic.
You're a straight Paragon
games.
light side person.
Yeah, I can't do bad things to people. I'm the Boy Scout. So
Lyndon, it's your religious guilt coming to bear in your gaming life.
Well, I hope the parrot appreciates that because I was very prompt with my payments for both of those things. Great Z targeting. So mine for the week, I was having a hard time deciding if I wanted to go with the Hero Shade or with my actual pick. And I'm going to save the Hero Shade for later because
you have to.
Yeah. I'm going to go with Boss Monkey. Who
always a good one.
Yeah, really good one. Really fun mini boss. I love when mini bosses are not just dead when they like recur later in the game and later in the dungeon, right? Like the build up here is really fun where you kind of actually freed this thing from being possessed and then it comes back to help you later. Really fun sequence of events. Also, I just kind of like the character design of Boss Monkey. Goofy for sure, but he has personality.
I think if we got rid of the butt slapping, I would really like this character a lot more. And to my headcanon earlier about the monkeys being this game's incarnation of the Kokiri, I'd like to think that the boss monkey is Mido, and Mido's coming back to help you.
More headcanon. I love it. But anyway, Boss Monkey, very good first mini boss for this game, and briefly was the wielder of the Gale Boomerang, so you have to give him points for that.
Good for him.
All right, that brings us to part 6, which is our final thoughts, where we let Matt wrap up this section of the game in as succinct a way as he can think to do.
We come to the second part of our introductory section of this game to find another heavily packed section with character development, lore, world building, and backstory. We go through a very long section of game as Wolf Link, where we become more accustomed and attuned to the controls that we'll have to use throughout the game, with movement, with Vessels of Light, with combat, and progress into our first dungeon of the game, which takes place in a very familiar setting for those of us who grew up with Ocarina of Time. We move into a really excellent example of a first dungeon full of puzzles and characters and mini bosses that challenge us and are enjoyable to the extreme, culminating all of this with a boss fight that works well as a first boss fight, but doesn't blow us out of the water. And looking forward to our next section of game where we get to explore more of the world of Hyrule and see what we have coming up in the Twilight realms.
Well done, as always, Matt. That brings us to the end of the Sacred Realms Rundown. We will be back next week with another installment of the Sacred Realms Rundown. Next week is going to be Goron Mines, Matt, and I think originally... Yeah, it's going to be a fun one. I think originally we were planning on having the detective on for that episode, but life has been busy in our neck of the woods, and I haven't actually managed to get him the Wii U with his copy of the game yet. So I think next week is probably going to be you and I again, which is, totally fine. Nothing wrong with it. But we already have guests lined up for a lot of the later episodes of this season, including some returning favorites who haven't been around for a while. So gonna be a really fun time overall. Can't wait to get into it, Matt. Just thinking about everything I know that happens next week. It sounds pretty great.
Look, we haven't had a string of just you and I episodes in a long time. I think our record recently of just you and I episodes is like 3. So it's kind of nice. I don't know. It also makes for some more svelte pod. Not overly more svelte. We're still at like 2 hours, but it's nice to just get back to our roots and shoot the shit. Just you and me.
Couldn't agree more, Matt. All right, let's go ahead and wrap this thing up for the week. Not because it's any later than it normally is when we stop recording.
It's about the same time.
But because, 1, Ahsoka is on tonight, and 2...
Yes, let's go.
Let's go. And 2, because you pretty much have to start playing next week's section of Twilight Princess
right now.
Right now. Because there's so much of it. It's so big. Oh, Lordy. Okay. But in the best way.
Yeah,
it's great.
It's good.
It's all good. Like,
yeah, I'm not mad about how much game we have to play outside of the fact that I have to write plot recaps, which take me 4 hours.
Well, there you go. I mean, I can understand why that would set your mood back just a little bit, but the pod appreciates it, Matt.
Yeah, I try my best.
All right, y'all. If you enjoyed today's show and you would like a little extra Sacred Realms in your life, you can head over to patreon.com/Sacred Realms Pod and become a patron. If you've got no rupees, it is not a problem. 5-star Apple Podcast reviews are an excellent free way to support us. More reviews means that more people see our show. That makes us very happy, Hylians. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Sacred Realms Pod for updates on the podcast and for behind-the-scenes action. Sacred Realms will be back next Wednesday with our thoughts on Twilight Princess Chapter 3. We'd love for you to play along with us and to share your thoughts on our social channels. Twilight Princess can be played in its original form on either the Nintendo GameCube or the Nintendo Wii. The HD version can be played on the Nintendo Wii U, and if you own any of those versions legally, then you can emulate it via a variety of platforms and means. But in the meantime, may your hearts be full, may your arrows never miss. We will catch y'all next time. Sacred Realms is an independent, listener-supported podcast, which is produced, edited, and mixed by me, Lyndon Willoughby. Business operations are handled by Matt Willoughby. Our music is generously provided by Darknuck and is available to listen to on Spotify. Finally, we'd like to thank Nintendo for continuing to create such exceptional and innovative experiences.